10-year-old girl returns home with newborn twins. Mother immediately calls 911. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The sun filtered through the thin lace curtains, casting golden stripes across the hardwood floor of Sarah Collins's small kitchen. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound accompanying her as she stood at the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal. Her mornings had become a monotonous ritual ever since Emily vanished. A bird chirped from the tree outside, its song an odd contrast to the heaviness in Sarah's heart. She absent-mindedly wiped her hands on a dish towel and glanced at the kitchen clock. 8:02 a.m. She hadn't slept well the night before. Again. Every night was the same. She'd lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the last memory she had of Emily. The afternoon when her 10-year-old daughter had walked home from school and never arrived. Sarah had called everyone she could think of, and when no one had seen her, she called the police. That day had marked the beginning of a nightmare. It had been a year, a long, excruciating year. No leads, no clues, just a lingering question that haunted Sarah's every breath. Where was Emily? The knock on the front door came so suddenly that she jumped. Spilling a bit of the oatmeal onto the stove, she turned off the burner, grabbed a kitchen rag, and wiped her hands as she walked to the door. It was probably the mailman or a neighbor stopping by to check on her like they often did. But when she opened the door, she froze. Standing there, shivering on the porch, was Emily. Her once vibrant blonde hair was matted, her cheeks sunken, and her clothes tattered and damp from the morning dew. In her arms, she cradled two tiny babies wrapped in thin blankets. Their cries were soft but urgent, as if they hadn't been fed in hours. Sarah's heart stopped. Her mind couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. "Emily," she whispered, her voice cracking. The girl looked up, her blue eyes hollow but unmistakably hers. "Can I come in?" Sarah didn't respond. She couldn't. Her body moved on autopilot, stepping aside to let her daughter inside. As Emily crossed the threshold, Sarah's gaze shifted to the babies in her arms. Who were they? Where had they come from? And more importantly, how was this possible? "Emily," she said again, her voice trembling. "What's going on? Where have you been?" Emily sat on the couch, her frail body sinking into the cushions. She clutched the babies tighter, as if afraid someone might take them away. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't talk about it yet. Please, don't call anyone." "But," Sarah's instinct screamed at her to grab the phone, to call the police or a doctor, anyone who could help. Her daughter had been missing for a year. And now she was back, malnourished and carrying newborns. None of this made sense. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, please," her voice cracked. "If you call them, they'll find us. I can't go back. They'll hurt the babies." The weight of those words hit Sarah like a punch to the chest. They'll hurt the babies. Who was she talking about? What had happened to her? Sarah knelt in front of the couch, placing a trembling hand on Emily's knee. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "I need to understand. Are you in danger? Who are they?" Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I can't tell you yet, but I promise." "Mom, I'll tell you everything when it's safe." She sniffled and rocked the babies gently in her arms. "Just don't call anyone, please." Sarah's instincts battled within her. Every fiber of her being wanted to protect Emily. But how could she do that without knowing the truth? Her fingers hovered over the phone on the coffee table. But the look in her daughter's eyes stopped her. There was so much fear there, fear and desperation. Finally, she made her choice. "All right," she said, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I won't call anyone, but you have to promise me that when you're ready, you'll tell me everything." Emily nodded, wiping her tears away with the sleeve of her worn-out sweater. "I promise." Sarah sat down next to her, her mind spinning with questions. "Emily," she asked hesitantly, "who are the babies?" Emily's gaze dropped to the tiny faces nestled against her chest. "They're mine," she whispered. The words sucked the air out of Sarah's lungs. "What do you mean they're yours?" she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "Emily, that's not possible. You're just a child." "I know it doesn't make sense," Emily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's true. I had them when I was gone." Sarah's hands trembled. Her brain struggled to process the information. None of this added up. Emily couldn't have had babies. She was only 10, and yet the evidence was right there in front of her. Two tiny, fragile lives clinging to her daughter, as if she were their only source of safety. Before Sarah could say anything else, one of the babies began to cry. Emily rocked it gently, humming a soft lullaby that Sarah recognized from when Emily was little. She used to sing it every night before bed. The memory sent a wave of pain crashing over her. "Where have you been, Emily?" she whispered. Emily didn't answer. She kept rocking the baby until its cries subsided. Sarah sat there in silence, staring at her daughter, trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't have all the pieces yet. Where had she been? Who had done this to her? And why was she so afraid? Outside, the morning sun continued to rise, casting a warm glow over the quiet suburban street. But inside the house, a storm was brewing. Sarah knew this was only the beginning, and whatever secrets Emily was keeping, they were about to turn her world upside down. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting golden patterns on the living room rug as the soft coos of the babies filled the silence. Sarah sat motionless, her hands clenched together on her lap. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there, staring at Emily and the two tiny lives swaddled in blankets. Her heart was racing, her thoughts spinning out of control. "They're mine," Emily had said. But it couldn't be true. It was impossible. Emily shifted on the couch, gently placing the sleeping babies on the cushions beside her. The sound of her breath, shaky and uneven, was the only clue to how fragile she truly was. Her small frame looked even more delicate in the morning light, and Sarah couldn't help but notice the dark circles under her daughter's eyes, the way her lips were chapped and pale. "Emily," Sarah began again, her voice soft but insistent. "I need you to explain this to me. These babies, how could they be yours?" Emily's gaze remained fixed on the floor. Her fingers nervously twisted the frayed hem of her sweater. "I told you, Mom. I had them when I was gone." "That's not enough," Sarah whispered, trying to keep her voice steady. She wanted to wrap her arms around her daughter, to protect her from whatever nightmare she had lived through. But she needed answers first. "Where were you? Who took you? Were you hurt?" Emily's eyes flickered up briefly, and for a moment, Sarah saw something raw and broken flash across her face. But just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by the same guarded expression she'd had since she walked through the door. "I can't tell you everything," Emily said quietly. "Not yet." Sarah stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. The morning felt too quiet, too normal, as if the world outside didn't know that hers had just been turned upside down. She rubbed her hands over her face, trying to calm the wave of emotions crashing over her: fear, confusion, and a growing sense of dread. "Emily, please," she begged, turning to face her daughter. "I'm your mother. I'm supposed to protect you, but I can't do that if you don't tell me what's going on." Emily's lower lip trembled, and for a moment Sarah thought she might finally break down and confess everything. But instead, Emily shook her head and pulled the babies closer to her chest, as if shielding them from the conversation. "If I tell you," she whispered, "they'll come back for me. For us." The words hit Sarah like a blow to the chest. Whoever had taken her daughter was still out there, still a threat. "You're safe now," Sarah said, her voice firm but gentle. "You're home. No one can hurt you here." Emily shook her head again. "You don't understand. They're watching. They always are." Sarah's hands trembled as she sat back down on the couch, next to her daughter. "Then help me understand, Emily. Tell me who they are." Emily's eyes darted toward the window, as if she expected someone to be standing there watching them. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "New Dawn Medical." The name meant nothing to Sarah, but the way Emily said it, like it was something dark and dangerous, sent a chill down her spine. "What is New Dawn Medical?" she asked. Emily bit her lip, hesitating. "It's where they took me. It looks like a hospital, but it's not. They do things there. Experiments." She swallowed hard, her small hands clutching the blanket around the babies. "They said I was special. That's why they kept me." Sarah felt her breath hitch. Her mind raced with terrifying possibilities, but she pushed them aside and focused on her daughter. "Emily, did they hurt you?" Emily hesitated, her fingers tightening on the fabric. "No, they just watched me, took tests, gave me shots. I didn't know what they were doing, but then, after a few months, I started feeling different, and then—" She stopped, tears welling up in her eyes. "The babies came." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Sarah could barely process what she was hearing. Her 10-year-old daughter had been taken, experimented on, and somehow during that time she had given birth to 2 babies. How was this possible? "Emily," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking, "why didn't you try to escape sooner?" "I did," Emily said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I tried so many times, but they always found me. And then one night, there was a fire in one of the labs. The alarms went off and everyone was panicking. I grabbed the babies and ran. I hid until morning and then I kept walking until I found the road." She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. "I didn't know where to go. I just kept walking, and then I found my way back here." Sarah reached out and pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly as she sobbed. "You're so brave, Emily," she whispered, her own tears falling freely now. "You're so brave." For a few moments they sat there in silence, clinging to each other. But as Sarah's mind started to calm, new questions began to creep in. If New Dawn Medical was as dangerous as Emily described, then they wouldn't just let her go without a fight. "Emily," she said softly, "does anyone know you're here?" Emily pulled back slightly, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't think so. I was careful. But I don't know, Mom. They always find a way." Sarah's stomach twisted. She stood up and began pacing the room again, her mind racing. She needed to protect Emily and the babies. But she didn't know who she was up against or how far they would go to get them back. Suddenly, the sound of a car engine rumbled outside, breaking the fragile calm of the morning. Sarah rushed to the window and peeked through the curtains. A black car was parked across the street. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Emily," she said, her voice shaking. "Go upstairs, take the babies with you, don't come down until I say it's safe." Emily hesitated, but the urgency in Sarah's voice made her obey. She gathered the babies and hurried up the stairs, her footsteps barely making a sound. Sarah stayed by the window, watching as the car door opened and a man in a dark suit stepped out. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, scanning the street before getting back in the car and driving away. Her hands trembled as she let the curtain fall back into place. Whoever that man was, she knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. And if Emily was right about New Dawn Medical, then the worst was yet to come. The morning sun climbed higher, casting its light on the family photos lining the walls of the living room. Dust motes floated lazily in the air, undisturbed by the turmoil brewing inside the house. Upstairs, Sarah could hear the soft murmurs of Emily soothing the babies. Their tiny cries faded, leaving behind a fragile silence. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands gripping a lukewarm cup of coffee. Her fingers trembled as memories flooded her mind, each one more painful than the last. Where had it all gone wrong? A knock on the door startled her. She nearly spilled her coffee as she jumped to her feet. Peeking cautiously through the curtains, she breathed a small sigh of relief when she recognized the familiar face standing on the porch. Ethan Collins. Her ex-husband stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, shifting nervously from one foot to the other. His brown hair was slightly disheveled, and the lines around his eyes seemed deeper than the last time she had seen him. They hadn't spoken much since the divorce, except for updates on the search for Emily. His presence here now meant one thing: she wasn't the only one feeling the storm brewing. Sarah unlocked the door and opened it slowly. "Ethan." "Sarah," he said, his voice cautious. He glanced over her shoulder as if expecting to see someone behind her. "Can I come in?" She hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. "Yeah, come in." The tension between them was palpable as he entered the house and looked around. His gaze landed on the staircase, and for a moment Sarah saw something soften in his expression. He had always been protective of Emily, even after the divorce. Losing her had broken him too, though he had been better at hiding it. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah gestured toward the stairs. "She's upstairs with the babies." Ethan's brows furrowed. "Babies?" Sarah swallowed hard, unsure of how to begin. "It's complicated. Sit down." He followed her into the kitchen and sat across from her at the table. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah stared at her coffee, trying to find the right words to explain what had happened in the last few hours. Finally, she took a deep breath and began. "She showed up this morning. Out of nowhere, she just walked through the door holding 2 newborns. Ethan's eyes widened. "What? How? Where has she been all this time?" "She won't tell me everything," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "But she said she was taken to a place called New Dawn Medical. They experimented on her, Ethan. She said they did tests, gave her injections, and somehow, during that time, she had these babies." He leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "That doesn't make any sense. She's just a kid. How could she have—" "I know," Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. "I know it doesn't make sense, but she's terrified, Ethan. She thinks they're coming to take her back." Ethan exhaled sharply and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "We have to call the police." "I can't," Sarah said, shaking her head. "She begged me not to. She thinks if we call them, New Dawn will find her. She's scared they'll hurt the babies." Ethan stared at her, his jaw tightening. "Sarah, this is bigger than us. If there's a group out there experimenting on kids, we can't handle this alone." "I know," she whispered. "But I can't risk losing her again, not when I just got her back." Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Sarah's mind raced with memories from the past year, the late nights searching for clues, the endless phone calls to the police, the nights she cried herself to sleep wondering if Emily was alive. She couldn't go through that again. Ethan broke the silence. "Do you remember that night?" Sarah looked up, her throat tightening. "Which one?" "The night she disappeared." His voice was soft, almost distant, as if he were reliving it in his mind. "I came to pick her up for dinner, but you said she'd walked home from school. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I figured she'd just taken the long way home. But when you called me that night and said she was missing—" He trailed off, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I should have looked harder. I should have—" "Don't do that to yourself," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "We both did everything we could. This isn't our fault." Ethan nodded, but the guilt in his eyes didn't fade. "I still think about it every day." "I do too," Sarah admitted. "But right now we need to focus on keeping her safe." Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze hardening with determination. "Then we need a plan. If we're not calling the police, we need to figure out who these people are and what they want with her." Sarah nodded. "She mentioned New Dawn Medical. Have you ever heard of it?" He shook his head. "No, but I can start looking into it. I still have a few contacts who owe me favors. Maybe someone can dig up information." Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. "There's something else," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When she came in, she said they were watching her. And this morning there was a black car parked across the street. A man got out, looked around, and then drove off." Ethan's jaw clenched. They already know she's here. The realization hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Emily had only been home for a few hours. And already they were being watched. "We don't have much time," Ethan said, standing up. "I'll start making calls. You stay with Emily and the babies. Keep the doors locked, and if you see anything suspicious, call me immediately." Sarah nodded, her hands shaking as she walked him to the door. Be careful. I will. He hesitated for a moment, then gently squeezed her shoulder. We're going to figure this out, Sarah, I promise. She watched him walk down the porch steps and disappear into his car. As he drove away, the weight of everything settled heavily on her chest. She locked the door and leaned against it, closing her eyes for a brief moment to collect herself. Then she heard the faint cry of a baby from upstairs. Pushing her fear aside, Sarah climbed the stairs and found Emily sitting on the bed, cradling one of the babies while the other lay sleeping beside her. Her daughter looked up, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Mom," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. "Are they coming for us?" Sarah sat on the bed and wrapped her arms around her daughter, pulling her close. "Not if I can help it," she said firmly. "We're going to keep you safe. I promise." But deep down she knew that promise wouldn't be easy to keep. The sun was fully up now, casting a warm glow across the neighborhood. Outside, the street seemed peaceful, with joggers passing by and birds chirping in the distance. But inside Sarah Collins's home, nothing felt calm. The tension clung to the walls like a thick fog. Sarah paced the living room, her fingers clenched tightly around her phone. Every time she glanced at it, the same battle waged within her. Should she call the police or continue trusting Emily's plea to keep them out of this? Upstairs, the babies stirred, their soft cries filtering down the hallway. She heard Emily talking to them, her voice gentle but exhausted. Sarah's heart ached. Her daughter had been through so much. And Sarah didn't even know the half of it. But what she did know was that whoever these people were, New Dawn Medical, they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. The knock on the door made her jump. Her pulse quickened as she cautiously approached the door and peeked through the curtain. For a moment, relief flooded her when she saw Ethan standing there again, holding a notepad and wearing a determined expression. She quickly unlocked the door and let him in. "Any news?" she asked as she closed the door behind him. "I've been making calls," Ethan said, setting his notepad on the kitchen counter. "Most people haven't heard of New Dawn Medical, but one of my contacts said it's a private research facility. Off the radar. No public records, no website. They specialize in experimental treatments, supposedly cutting-edge stuff. But he said their operations are secretive, like very secretive." Sarah's breath caught. "What kind of treatments?" "Genetics," Ethan said grimly. "Manipulating DNA, immunology, that kind of thing. If Emily was taken there, they weren't just giving her regular medical exams. They were using her for something specific." The weight of his words pressed down on Sarah's chest. She leaned against the counter, trying to steady herself. "So what do we do now?" "We need proof," Ethan said. "Something concrete to show the authorities. If we go to the police without evidence, they might not believe us. Or worse, they could tip off the wrong people." Sarah nodded slowly, but a part of her was still unsure. She had trusted the authorities when Emily first disappeared. And it had gotten her nowhere. The police had filed their reports, conducted their searches, but in the end, they had labeled Emily a runaway and moved on. "Sarah," Ethan said gently, pulling her out of her thoughts. "I know you don't trust them, but if we don't act soon, these people will find her again." "I know," Sarah whispered. She glanced up at the ceiling where she could still hear Emily humming softly to the babies. "But if we call the police and they don't believe us, it could put her in even more danger. I can't lose her again, Ethan. I just can't." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Then we need another option. Something fast, something that doesn't involve waiting for the system to catch up." Sarah's mind raced. She thought of the man in the black car that morning, the way he had scanned the street before driving off. He wasn't a random passerby. He was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. "What if we leave?" she said suddenly. "Pack up Emily and the babies and go somewhere they can't find us." Ethan frowned. "Sarah, running isn't a solution. They'll track you down eventually. You saw how quickly they found her here." "I know," she said, her voice shaking. "But if we stay here, we're sitting ducks." Ethan leaned forward, resting his arms on the counter. "I'm not saying we shouldn't protect her, but if we leave without knowing who we're running from or what they want, We'll be blind. We'll always be looking over our shoulders. Sarah closed her eyes, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. Running wouldn't solve anything. But staying put felt just as dangerous. Then what do you suggest? She asked quietly. Ethan tapped the notepad in front of him. I think I found someone who can help. His name is Mark Davids, an investigative journalist. He's dealt with uncovering secret organizations before. If anyone can dig into New Dawn Medical, it's him. Sarah's eyebrows lifted in surprise. You think he'll take the risk? Ethan nodded. I spoke to him briefly. He's interested, but he wants to meet with us first to get more details. When? This afternoon, Ethan said. I can drive you there, but only if you think it's safe to leave Emily for a couple of hours. Sarah bit her lip, torn between her desire to find answers and her need to protect her daughter. Emily had only been home for a few hours, and already danger seemed to be closing in. But if this journalist could help them expose New Dawn Medical, it might be their only shot at ending this nightmare. I'll go, she said finally. But I'm not leaving Emily alone. I'll ask my neighbor Linda to come stay with her while we're gone. Ethan nodded, relief washing over his face. Good. We'll get answers, Sarah. I promise. An hour later, Sarah stood on the porch, watching as Linda, a retired teacher with a warm, motherly demeanor, stepped inside the house. Don't worry about a thing, Linda said, giving Sarah's hand a reassuring squeeze. I'll take good care of them. Sarah forced a smile, though her nerves were still on edge. She leaned down and kissed Emily's forehead. I won't be gone long, sweetheart. Stay inside, okay? Don't open the door for anyone except me or Linda. Emily nodded, clutching one of the babies tightly against her chest. Be careful, Mom. I will, Sarah promised. She and Ethan climbed into his car, and as they drove away, Sarah couldn't help but glance over her shoulder, half expecting the black car to follow them. But the road behind them remained empty, for now. They arrived at the small cafe where Mark Davids was waiting. He was seated at a corner table, his laptop open in front of him, and a cup of coffee steaming by his side. He looked up as they approached, his sharp eyes scanning them like he was already piecing together the story. Sarah Collins, he said, standing to shake her hand. I've been waiting to meet you. Sarah sat down, her fingers tightening around her purse. We don't have much time. My daughter's life is in danger. Mark nodded, pulling out a notepad. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything you know about New Dawn Medical. Sarah took a deep breath and began recounting everything. Emily's disappearance, her return that morning, the babies and the strange experiments Emily had described. Mark listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or asking questions. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. This isn't the first time I've heard about New Dawn, he said. But this is the first time I've heard about them targeting children. What do you know about them? Ethan asked. They're connected to multiple shell companies, Mark explained. On the surface, they claim to be a research facility, but there's evidence suggesting they're involved in illegal genetic experiments. Most of their funding comes from private donors, and whoever's backing them has deep pockets. Sarah's heart pounded. Can you prove it? Mark nodded slowly. It'll take time, but if I can dig into their financial records and find out who's behind the funding, we might be able to bring them down. But time is something we don't have, Sarah said, her voice urgent. They already know where Emily is. Mark leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Then let's make sure they don't get to her first. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah knew they were walking a dangerous line, but at this point there was no turning back. The sound of tires crunching on gravel filled the air as Ethan's car pulled into Sarah's driveway. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, giving everything an eerie stillness. Sarah stepped out of the car, her heart still pounding from the meeting with Mark Davids. She had thought that after Emily returned, the worst was over. But now, it was clear they were only at the beginning of a battle that could cost them everything. Ethan walked around the car to meet her, his eyes scanning the street as if expecting trouble at any moment. Are you sure you'll be okay here tonight? I don't have a choice, Sarah replied. Emily needs me, and we don't know when these people will make their move. She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for today, Ethan. I know we haven't always agreed on things, but you being here, it helps." He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "We're in this together. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah watched as he got back into his car and drove away, her chest tightening with anxiety. She knew Ethan meant what he said, but there was only so much he could do. If New Dawn Medical was as powerful as Mark described, then they were dealing with people who wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. With a sigh, Sarah turned toward the house. She had just reached the front door when she noticed something strange, a small white envelope tucked between the doorframe and the wall. Her pulse quickened as she pulled it out and opened it, her fingers trembling. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message scrawled in neat, precise handwriting. "You can't hide forever." Her breath hitched, and she immediately looked around, scanning the street and nearby yards. Everything seemed normal, too normal. The joggers were gone, the kids playing on the sidewalk had disappeared, and the only sound was the distant hum of a lawnmower. But she knew someone had been here. Someone was watching. Forcing herself to stay calm, she crumpled the note in her hand and entered the house, locking the door behind her. "Mom?" Emily's voice called from the living room. Sarah tucked the note into her pocket and tried to compose herself before walking into the room. Emily sat on the couch, holding one of the babies, while the other slept peacefully in the bassinet Linda had brought over earlier. The sight of her daughter safe and sound should have comforted Sarah. But instead, it made her fear grow stronger. "How are they doing?" Sarah asked, sitting down next to Emily. "They're okay," Emily said softly, stroking the baby's tiny hand. "But I'm scared, Mom. What if they come for us?" Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't want to lie, but she also couldn't let her daughter live in constant fear. "We're going to keep you safe," she said, brushing a strand of hair out of Emily's face. "I promise." Emily bit her lip, her eyes welling with tears. "You said that before, when I was little. You always promised you'd keep me safe." The guilt hit Sarah like a tidal wave. "I know, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling Emily into a gentle hug. "And I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you before, but I'm not letting them take you away again, no matter what." For a moment, they stayed like that, holding each other in the quiet warmth of the living room. But then, a knock at the door shattered the fragile peace. Sarah's head snapped up, her body tensing. "Stay here," she said, gently taking the baby from Emily and placing it in the bassinet. "Don't come to the door unless I say it's safe." Emily nodded, her face pale. Sarah walked to the front door, her heart pounding against her ribs. Peeking through the window, she saw a man standing on the porch. He wasn't wearing a suit like the man from earlier that morning. This one looked different. He had a rugged, unshaven face, a leather jacket, and a demeanor that made Sarah uneasy. "Who is it, Mom?" Emily called from the living room. "I don't know," Sarah replied. "Stay put." She unlocked the door just enough to crack it open. "Can I help you?" The man took off his sunglasses and smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind that hid something beneath it. "Mrs. Collins, I presume?" Her grip on the door tightened. "Who are you?" "My name's Victor. I'm an associate of Mark David's." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to her through the crack in the door. "He sent me to deliver this to you. Said you'd want to see it right away." Sarah hesitated, but something about the way he looked at her made her feel like she didn't have a choice. She took the paper and unfolded it, scanning the message quickly. "Sarah, Victor's with me. He's here to help. Trust him. I found something big. I'll explain more soon." The note was signed by Mark, but Sarah's instincts were still screaming at her not to trust this man. "Why didn't Mark bring this himself?" she asked. Narrowing her eyes, Victor shrugged. "He's digging into some sensitive stuff, didn't want to risk being followed here. I'm the safer option." Safer? Sarah wasn't so sure. But if Victor really was connected to Mark and could help, she couldn't afford to turn him away. She opened the door wider and stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. Thank you, he said, walking into the house and glancing around as if assessing the place. You've got a nice setup here. Sarah closed the door and locked it, still watching him closely. What kind of help are you offering? Protection, Victor replied, leaning against the wall. Mark told me you've got some dangerous people on your trail. If they're who I think they are, you're gonna need someone like me. Someone like you? Victor smirked. Let's just say I have experience dealing with people who think they're untouchable. Sarah crossed her arms. And why should I trust you? Because you don't have a choice, he said bluntly. You can either trust me and give your daughter a fighting chance, or you can try to do this alone, and hope you don't wake up one morning to find her gone again. The harshness of his words sent a shiver down her spine, but she knew he wasn't wrong. She had already lost Emily once. She couldn't risk it happening again. Fine, she said, her voice firm, but if you do anything to put my daughter in danger, you'll regret it. Victor chuckled. Fair enough. Sarah turned toward the living room where Emily was peeking around the corner, watching them cautiously. Emily, it's okay, Sarah said. This is Victor. He's going to help us. Emily stepped out from behind the wall, her eyes wide and uncertain. Are you sure, Mom? I'm sure, Sarah said, though her heart was still racing. Victor smiled at Emily, but it wasn't the same unsettling smile he had given Sarah at the door. This one seemed softer, almost genuine. Hey, kid, he said. Don't worry, we'll keep you safe. Emily didn't say anything, but she slowly nodded and walked back to the couch. As Victor settled into one of the chairs, Sarah sat across from him, her mind racing. She didn't know if she could fully trust him, but for now, he was their best chance at staying one step ahead of New Dawn Medical. Because if Mark was right, if what they had uncovered really was as dangerous as it seemed, then their time was running out. The evening crept in quietly, its golden light fading as dusk settled over the neighborhood. Shadows stretched long and thin across the walls of the living room, and the hum of a car engine in the distance was the only sound cutting through the stillness. But inside Sarah's home, tension buzzed like static electricity, suffocating and ever-present. Victor leaned back in the armchair, his leather jacket creaking softly as he adjusted his position. His sharp eyes scanned the room like a man always on guard, as if he could sense trouble lurking just outside the window. Sarah sat across from him, her hands clenched together so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She was trying to process everything: Victor's sudden appearance, Mark's cryptic note, and the ever-present threat of New Dawn Medical closing in on them. Upstairs, Emily was putting the babies to sleep, and every sound from above made Sarah's heart skip a beat. Victor broke the silence. You're worried they're watching, aren't you? Sarah's gaze snapped to him. Why wouldn't I be? They found her once. What's stopping them from doing it again? Victor nodded, as if he had expected that response. They probably are watching, he said bluntly. But that's what we're here to change. We? Sarah asked, narrowing her eyes. Wing. Me, you, Mark, and whoever else we can pull in, Victor replied. This isn't just about Emily anymore. If New Dawn is as powerful as Mark says, they've been doing this to more than one family. You're just the lucky ones who figured it out in time. Sarah let out a bitter laugh. Lucky? Her voice trembled. My daughter went missing for a year, and when she comes back, she's carrying 2 babies and terrified for her life. If that's what you call lucky, I'd hate to see what unlucky looks like. Victor's expression softened, but he didn't apologize. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You've made it this far. That counts for something. But if you want to keep her safe, you're going to have to make some tough decisions. Tough decisions? Sarah's voice rose slightly, her frustration bubbling to the surface. What exactly do you think I've been doing all day, Victor? I've been making nothing but tough decisions since the moment Emily walked through that door. Before Victor could respond, there was a knock at the door, soft, hesitant, and unexpected. Sarah shot to her feet, her heart racing. She glanced toward the stairs where Emily had poked her head out of her bedroom, her eyes wide with fear. Stay upstairs, Sarah mouthed, and Emily quickly ducked back into the room. Victor was already on his feet. Moving silently toward the door, He pulled a small handgun from under his jacket, holding it at his side as he peeked through the curtain. His body tensed for a moment before he turned back to Sarah. "It's your neighbor. The older lady. Linda, right?" Sarah exhaled sharply, relief flooding through her. "Put that away," she whispered, motioning to the gun. Victor tucked it back into his jacket and stepped aside as Sarah opened the door. "Linda," she said, forcing a smile. "What are you doing out this late?" Linda, wearing her familiar knit sweater and holding a basket of baked goods, smiled kindly. "I was just making some cookies and thought you could use a few. I know you've been through a lot lately, and I figured a little sugar might help." Sarah's throat tightened. Linda had always been kind to her, checking in regularly ever since Emily disappeared. But now, even this simple gesture felt like a reminder of how fragile their safety was. "That's really sweet of you," Sarah said, taking the basket. "Thank you." Linda glanced over Sarah's shoulder, her gaze landing on Victor, who stood by the staircase with his arms crossed. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company," she said, her smile faltering slightly. "This is a friend of ours," Sarah said quickly. "He's helping with a few things." Linda's eyes lingered on Victor for a moment longer before she nodded. "Well, I won't keep you. Just wanted to drop those off. Let me know if you need anything." "Thanks again," Sarah said, closing the door and locking it behind her. Victor smirked. "Your cover story could use some work." Sarah shot him a glare. "She's a good woman. I don't want her getting caught up in this." Victor nodded, his smirk fading. "I get it. But you should know if New Dawn's watching, they're not just watching you. They'll be watching anyone you've had contact with." The thought made Sarah's stomach churn. She set the basket of cookies on the counter and leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. "So what do we do now?" "We test their limits," Victor said. "We see how closely they're watching. Tonight." "What do you mean?" Victor pulled out his phone and started typing something quickly. "We're going to leave a false trail. Make them think you're planning to leave town. If they're tracking your movements, they'll take the bait, and once they show their hand, we'll know exactly how close they are." Sarah's blood ran cold. "You want to bait them?" "It's the only way to know what we're dealing with," Victor said firmly. "I'll make it look like you bought bus tickets for tonight. I'll have someone drive to the station with a suitcase to throw them off. If they take the bait, we'll know they're watching. And if they don't?" Victor's expression darkened. "Then it means they're planning something worse." Sarah's mind raced. The idea of luring New Dawn Medical into making a move terrified her. But at the same time, they couldn't sit around waiting for the enemy to strike. If they had any hope of staying ahead, they needed to be proactive. "Okay," she said finally. "Do it." Victor nodded and continued typing on his phone. "Give me an hour. I'll set everything up." An hour later, the house was eerily quiet. The babies were asleep, and Emily had finally drifted off after Sarah reassured her for the 10th time that they were safe for the night. Sarah sat on the couch, her fingers tapping nervously against her leg as she waited for Victor's plan to unfold. Her phone buzzed, and she quickly picked it up to see a message from him. "It's done. The decoy left the bus station 10 minutes ago. Let's see if they bite." Her breath hitched as she read the message. She wanted to believe this would work, that they could outsmart whoever was watching them. But deep down, a part of her was terrified that no amount of planning would be enough. Victor walked into the room holding his phone up. "We're tracking the car that dropped off the decoy. If anyone's following them, we'll know soon." Minutes ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. Sarah couldn't sit still. She paced the living room, her mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. What if this didn't work? What if they had already found another way to get to Emily? Suddenly, Victor's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his eyes narrowing. "They took the bait," he said, his voice calm but laced with tension. "There's a black car following our decoy." Sarah's breath came in short gasps. "Does that mean they're not coming here?" "For now," Victor said. "But this is only the first step. They're watching closely, Sarah. We need to be ready for when they make their real move." She nodded, her mind already racing with what they needed to do next. This was just the beginning, but at least now. They had something to work with. As she stood there, the weight of the situation pressing down on her, one thought kept echoing in her mind. I have to protect my daughter, no matter what. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant rustle of trees outside the window. Moonlight streamed in through the blinds, casting faint streaks of silver across the walls. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. Across from her, Victor stared intently at his laptop, the blue light reflecting off his face as he clicked through pages of information. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passing of each agonizing minute. Sarah could hear Emily shifting in her bed upstairs, her occasional murmurs breaking the silence. The babies had finally settled into sleep, their tiny breaths a gentle reminder that life still held fragile moments of peace, even in the middle of chaos. Victor exhaled sharply and leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. I found something, he said, his voice low but serious. Sarah leaned forward, her heart thudding in her chest. What is it? Victor turned the laptop around so she could see the screen. New Dawn Medical has connections to more than just experimental treatments. They're tied to a shell company called Biotech Solutions, which, on paper, looks like an ordinary biotech firm. But when you dig deeper, you find out that they've been receiving millions in private funding from anonymous donors. The kind of money that doesn't come without strings attached. Sarah's fingers tightened around her mug. So they're funded by powerful people who want to stay hidden. But why take Emily? What were they trying to do to her? Victor clicked to another screen, showing a series of documents, scientific reports, lab logs, and medical notes, some of them redacted. That's where it gets murky. These documents mention something called Project Genesis. It was an experimental program aimed at developing enhanced immune systems through genetic manipulation. Sarah's stomach turned. Enhanced immune systems? They were looking for subjects who could carry certain genetic traits, Victor explained. From what I can tell, they were hoping to create babies with natural resistance to diseases. Emily was likely chosen because of her genetic profile. He paused, giving her a moment to process the weight of what he was saying. They didn't just take her randomly, Sarah. They knew exactly what they were looking for. The room seemed to spin for a moment, and Sarah gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Her mind raced back to when Emily was a toddler, how she had always been a healthy, energetic child who rarely got sick. Was that why they had taken her? Because of something buried deep in her DNA that made her a perfect target for their experiments? I thought this kind of thing only happened in movies, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Secret experiments, genetic manipulation, it sounds like a nightmare. It is a nightmare, Victor agreed. But it's real, and these people aren't just going to walk away because Emily escaped. They invested time and money into this project. They'll want their results. Sarah's heart clenched. She didn't care about their results. All she cared about was keeping Emily safe and making sure those babies, the innocent products of a twisted experiment, never fell into New Dawn's hands. Is there anything in those documents about where they're keeping the rest of the subjects? Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Are there other children like Emily? Victor scrolled through a few more pages, his eyes scanning the text. There's a mention of multiple sites, but most of the locations are redacted. They've covered their tracks pretty well, but... He stopped, his eyes narrowing as he clicked on a file labeled Facility Log 19A. What is it? Sarah asked, leaning closer. This file lists shipments of medical equipment and supplies sent to a remote location just outside of town, Victor said, pointing to the screen. It's a warehouse registered to one of their shell companies. It could be nothing, but it's worth checking out. Sarah hesitated. If we go there and they catch us, that's a risk we have to take, Victor said firmly. If there's even a chance that they're using that warehouse as part of their operations, we need to know what's inside. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She knew Victor was right, but the thought of walking straight into enemy territory sent a wave of fear crashing over her. Still, They couldn't afford to sit back and wait for New Dawn to make their next move. "We'll go," she said finally. "But we have to be careful." Victor nodded. "We'll leave as soon as it's dark enough to cover our tracks." A few hours later, the neighborhood was blanketed in darkness. The hum of crickets filled the night air, and the occasional flicker of porch lights illuminated the quiet street. Sarah stood by the door, zipping up her jacket and glancing toward the staircase where Emily slept. She had tucked her daughter in earlier, whispering reassurances that they were safe, even though every fiber of her being was screaming otherwise. Victor walked in, slipping a flashlight into his pocket. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. They left through the back door, careful not to make any noise as they crossed the yard and slipped into Victor's car parked down the street. The drive was quiet, the tension between them thick and suffocating. Sarah stared out the window, her mind racing with possibilities. What if they found proof of more experiments? What if they were walking into a trap? Victor seemed to sense her unease. "We're doing the right thing," he said, his eyes never leaving the road. "If we find something tonight, we'll have the leverage we need to shut them down." Sarah nodded. But the knot in her stomach didn't loosen. After about 20 minutes, they turned down a dirt road that led to a large, isolated warehouse surrounded by a chain-link fence. The building loomed in the darkness, its metal walls reflecting the dim glow of a single security light near the entrance. Victor parked the car a safe distance away, and they crept toward the fence, keeping low to the ground. He pulled a pair of wire cutters from his bag and snipped a small section of the fence, creating an opening just large enough for them to slip through. The air was cold and smelled of damp earth as they made their way toward the warehouse. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she was sure it would give them away, but the area seemed deserted. No guards, no cameras, just an eerie silence that made her skin crawl. Victor tested the door and found it unlocked. He pushed it open slowly, the creak of the hinges echoing through the empty space. Inside, rows of metal shelves lined the walls, filled with crates and boxes labeled with scientific terms Sarah didn't recognize. They moved cautiously, their footsteps barely making a sound on the concrete floor. Victor motioned for Sarah to follow him as he headed toward a large metal door at the back of the warehouse. He pulled out his flashlight and shone it on the control panel next to the door. "It's locked," he muttered, pulling a small device from his bag. "Give me a second." Sarah stood guard, her eyes darting around the room. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound made her jump. She couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Finally, the lock clicked, and the door swung open. Victor shone his flashlight inside, revealing a small room filled with computers, filing cabinets, and medical equipment. Sarah's breath caught when she saw a stack of files on the desk, each one marked with a name and a series of numbers. "Start looking," Victor said. Already flipping through the files, Sarah grabbed a file and opened it, her eyes scanning the pages. Her hands trembled as she read about genetic experiments, DNA samples, and immunology trials. But then, one file caught her eye. A report labeled Subject 12, Emily Collins. Her blood ran cold. She flipped through the pages, her heart sinking with every word. They had monitored Emily's progress for months, noting changes in her health and genetic makeup. And at the bottom of the report, there was a chilling note. Status: active, recovery pending. "They're still looking for her," Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "They won't stop until they find her." Victor placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we have to make sure they can't." Sarah nodded, wiping her tears away. As they gathered as much evidence as they could, one thing became clear. This wasn't just about Emily. It was about destroying the entire operation before it destroyed them. The drive back home was quiet, but Sarah's mind was anything but. She stared out the window, watching the dark landscape rush past her, the trees casting long shadows under the moonlight. Her hands were still shaking from what they had found at the warehouse. The files detailing Emily's time at New Dawn Medical. The cold, clinical notes that treated her daughter like a science project. Status: active, recovery pending. The words echoed in her mind like a warning siren, growing louder with each passing second. She knew what it meant. They weren't done with Emily. They weren't going to stop until they had her back. Victor's voice broke through her thoughts. "We've got enough evidence to blow the lid off this operation. Once Mark sees those files, he'll know exactly who to contact. We can expose New Dawn Medical before they have time to cover their tracks." Sarah nodded, but her grip on the seatbelt tightened. "And what if they come for her before we can expose them?" Victor sighed, his fingers tapping against the steering wheel. "We'll be ready. I'm not letting anything happen to her, Sarah. You have my word." She didn't respond, but the weight of his promise sat heavily in the air between them. When they pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the faint glow of a nightlight in the upstairs window. Sarah quietly unlocked the door and stepped inside, the familiar scent of baby lotion and warm blankets wrapping around her like a fragile comfort. Victor followed her in, setting the bag of files on the kitchen table. "I'll go through these again tomorrow and send the most important ones to Mark," he said, keeping his voice low. "You should get some rest." Sarah nodded, though she knew sleep would be impossible. "Thank you, Victor, for everything." He offered a small smile, the kind that felt rare from someone like him. "We're getting closer. Just hold on a little longer." As Victor settled into the couch for the night, Sarah climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. She paused at the door to Emily's room, her heart squeezing at the sight of her daughter curled up in bed, one arm draped protectively over the sleeping babies. Their tiny chests rose and fell in sync, their peaceful breathing a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around them. Sarah tiptoed into the room and gently sat on the edge of the bed. Emily stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Mom?" she murmured sleepily. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's forehead. "I'm just checking on you." Emily blinked a few times, her gaze still hazy with sleep. "Did you find anything?" Sarah hesitated, not wanting to burden her daughter with the full weight of what they had discovered. "We found some information that will help us. Victor and I are working on a plan to make sure New Dawn can't hurt you again." Emily nodded, her eyes drifting closed again. "You won't let them take me, right?" "Never," Sarah said firmly, though her throat tightened as she spoke. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to Emily's forehead. "Go back to sleep, sweetheart. You're safe." Emily didn't respond, already slipping back into the safety of her dreams. But as Sarah sat there, watching her daughter sleep, she couldn't help but wonder how long that safety would last. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting warm beams of light across the room. The scent of fresh coffee wafted through the air, mingling with the soft sounds of the babies cooing from their bassinet. Sarah stood by the kitchen counter, cradling a cup of coffee in her hands. She hadn't slept, but the warmth of the mug grounded her, offering a momentary reprieve from the whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. Victor entered the kitchen, stretching his arms above his head. "Morning," he said, grabbing a cup for himself. "Did you sleep at all?" Sarah shook her head. "Couldn't." He took a sip of his coffee and sat down at the table, his gaze flicking to the stack of files. "We're making progress, Sarah. We've got evidence. We've got people helping us. That's more than we had yesterday." She exhaled slowly, trying to let his words sink in. "I know. It's just hard to feel hopeful when I know they're still out there waiting for their chance." Victor leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Do you know what I've learned about people like them? They rely on fear. They count on it to make you freeze, to make you second-guess yourself. But the fact that you're still standing here, fighting for your daughter, means they haven't won. You've already beaten them in ways they weren't prepared for." Sarah blinked, surprised by the depth of his words. She hadn't expected someone like Victor, a man who seemed so hardened by life, to understand the emotional toll this had taken on her. But in that moment she realized he wasn't just helping because it was part of the job. He genuinely cared. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking. He nodded, then stood up and stretched again. "Why don't you spend some time with Emily and the babies this morning? I'll go through the files again and see if there's anything we missed." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself a moment of calm. She carried her coffee upstairs where Emily was already awake, playing with the babies on the bed. Their giggles filled the room, and for a brief, beautiful moment, the world outside faded away. "Good morning," Sarah said, leaning against the doorframe. Emily smiled, her eyes brighter than they had been in days. "Look, Mom, they're finally starting to smile." Sarah walked over and sat on the bed, her heart swelling as she watched the tiny faces light up with joy. It was such a simple, pure moment, but it reminded her of why she was fighting so hard. "Do you think they'll ever have a normal life?" Emily asked suddenly, her voice tinged with both hope and uncertainty. Sarah wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "I do," she said softly. "It might take time, but we'll get there. You'll see." Emily leaned her head against Sarah's shoulder, her fingers gently stroking the baby's hand. "I just want them to be happy. I don't want them to grow up scared like me." Sarah's throat tightened, but she didn't let her emotions show. "They won't," she promised, "because you're going to be the best big sister they could ever ask for, and I'm going to do everything I can to protect all of you." As they sat there, bathed in the warmth of the morning sun, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For the first time since Emily had come home, she allowed herself to believe that they could win this battle. But deep down, she knew the fight wasn't over yet. The storm was still coming, and when it hit, she would be ready. The evening sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a warm orange hue across the neighborhood as shadows stretched like reaching fingers along the pavement. The house felt quieter than usual, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Sarah stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner, her mind elsewhere. Her thoughts circled endlessly around the files they had found, the names of the other children listed, and the chilling note about Emily's status being active. She knew Victor was right. They had made progress, but the weight of what they were fighting against felt heavier with each passing moment. Footsteps approached from behind, and she turned to see Victor entering the room, his expression grim. He had spent most of the day combing through the documents again, looking for anything they could have missed. "Anything new?" Sarah asked, setting down the knife. Victor shook his head. "Nothing we don't already know. But Mark called. He's trying to trace the financial backers listed in the documents. If he can link the funding to anyone high profile, it'll give us more leverage." Sarah nodded, though the idea of waiting for results felt like torture. "How long do you think we have before they come for her?" Victor's jaw tightened. "Not long. They know she's here and they're not going to wait forever." The weight of his words settled in her chest like a stone. She turned back to the counter, chopping mechanically as her thoughts spiraled. Suddenly, the sound of a car passing slowly outside made her pause. She set the knife down and moved to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see a black SUV creeping down the street. Her breath hitched. "Victor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He was at her side in an instant, peering through the curtain. The SUV continued past the house, its tinted windows concealing whoever was inside. But something about the way it slowed as it passed made Sarah's heart race. "They're scouting," Victor muttered, his hand instinctively moving toward his jacket, where she knew he kept his gun. "Testing to see if you're home, seeing how many people are inside." Sarah's hands shook as she pulled the curtain closed. "What do we do?" Victor's mind seemed to be working at lightning speed. "We can't let them know we're onto them. For now we stay calm and keep our routine normal. If we suddenly pack up and leave, they'll know we've spotted them." "But what if they come back tonight?" "They might," Victor admitted. "See? Which is why I'm staying up to keep watch." Sarah's stomach churned. The idea of someone waiting outside, planning to take her daughter, made her feel physically ill. But she couldn't let that fear paralyze her. She had to be strong. For Emily. For the babies. "I'll check on Emily," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Victor nodded, his gaze still fixed on the closed curtain. "I'll be downstairs if you need me." Emily was sitting on her bed, flipping through one of her old picture books while the babies slept peacefully in the bassinet nearby. The soft hum of their breathing filled the room, a comforting sound that reminded Sarah of how precious these moments were. Emily looked up when Sarah entered, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, sweetheart." Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes scanning her daughter's face. Emily looked tired, but there was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there when she first came home. It was faint, but it was there. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, setting the book aside. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "I'm okay, just a little tired." Emily didn't look convinced, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she leaned against Sarah, resting her head on her shoulder. "I miss when things were normal," she whispered. "When we didn't have to worry about people chasing us." Sarah's throat tightened. "I know, honey, I miss that too. Do you think it'll ever go back to the way it was?" Sarah wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close. "I don't know if things will ever be exactly the same, but I do know that we're going to make it through this. And when we do, we'll have a new kind of normal. A safe one." Emily nodded, her small fingers gripping Sarah's hand. "I believe you." They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of their shared fears hanging in the air. Then one of the babies stirred, letting out a soft cry. Emily got up and gently rocked the bassinet, humming the same lullaby Sarah used to sing to her when she was little. Watching her daughter care for the babies filled Sarah with both pride and sorrow. Emily had grown up so much in the past year, too much, too fast. She deserved to be a carefree child, not someone carrying the weight of something she couldn't control. Sarah stood and kissed Emily's forehead. "I'll be downstairs if you need me, okay?" "Okay, Mom." By the time night fell, the house was cloaked in darkness, with only the faint glow of the kitchen light illuminating the downstairs. Sarah sat on the couch, her legs curled under her while Victor stood by the window, watching for any sign of movement outside. The air was heavy with tension, and every creak of the floorboards or rustle of wind against the windows made Sarah's heart race. "Anything?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not yet," Victor replied, his eyes never leaving the street. "But they're patient. If they're planning something, they won't rush." The thought didn't comfort her. Just as she was about to suggest taking shifts so they could both get some rest, Victor tensed. "There," he said, pointing toward the street. Sarah's breath hitched as she followed his gaze. The same black SUV from earlier was parked a few houses down, its headlights off but the faint glow of the interior light visible. Someone was sitting inside, watching. "They're waiting for something," Victor muttered. "Should we call the police?" Victor shook his head. "Not yet. We don't want to tip them off that we've spotted them, but we'll be ready if they make a move." The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Sarah's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if they broke in? What if they took Emily before she could stop them? The thought of losing her daughter again was unbearable. Suddenly, the SUV's engine roared to life, and the vehicle pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the night. Victor exhaled, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. "They're testing us, seeing how easy it would be to get in and out without anyone noticing." "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Victor turned to her, his eyes hard with determination. "We don't wait for them to come to us. Tomorrow we go on the offensive." Sarah nodded, her fear slowly being replaced by something else. Resolve. Because no matter how powerful New Dawn Medical was, they had underestimated one thing: a mother's determination to protect her child, and Sarah wasn't going to let them win. The morning arrived with pale sunlight seeping through the windows, painting soft patches of warmth on the living room floor. But inside the house there was no warmth to be found. The air felt heavy, weighted down by the events of the night before. Sarah hadn't slept. She had stayed on the couch, watching the window long after the black SUV had disappeared, her mind racing with thoughts of what could have happened if they hadn't spotted it in time. Victor was already awake, seated at the kitchen table with his laptop open, his fingers flying across the keyboard. A steaming cup of coffee sat next to him, untouched. The faint glow of the screen reflected off his face, highlighting the deep lines of concentration etched across his features. Sarah walked into the kitchen, her arms folded across her chest. "Did you sleep at all?" Victor shook his head, not looking up. "Didn't want to risk missing anything." She sighed and poured herself a cup of coffee, the warmth of the mug soothing against her cold hands. "What are you working on now?" Digging into the name, scrolling through a page of data. Most of them are aliases, but a few of the doctors and technicians actually use their real names. I'm tracing their work histories, seeing if any of them left a trail that leads back to New Dawn Medical. Sarah took a seat across from him, her heart thudding in her chest. "Any luck?" "Maybe," Victor said, leaning back and rubbing his eyes. "There's one name that keeps popping up, Dr. Henry Maddox. He was listed as the lead researcher on Emily's file and several others. According to what I found, he left New Dawn Medical about 6 months ago, right around the time the fire broke out at the facility. The fire that gave Emily a chance to escape," Sarah whispered. "Exactly," Victor said. "He's the only person who might know exactly what they were doing to her. If we can find him, he could give us the answers we need." Sarah's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "Do you know where he is?" Victor nodded, a small grim smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "He's living in a cabin upstate off the grid. It wasn't easy to find, but he made one mistake. He used his real name to register a vehicle last month. We can be there in a few hours." A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. The idea of confronting someone who had been directly involved in her daughter's nightmare made her stomach churn. But she knew they had no choice. If Dr. Maddox had answers, she needed to hear them. "I'll pack a bag," she said, standing up. "We leave as soon as possible." The drive north was long and winding, the dense forest lining the sides of the road casting flickering shadows across the windshield. Sarah stared out the window, her thoughts spinning like a storm. Every mile they traveled felt like a step deeper into the unknown, but she clung to the hope that this trip would bring them closer to the truth and to freedom. Victor's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his gaze focused on the road ahead. "You okay back there?" he asked. Glancing in the rearview mirror, Sarah nodded, though her nerves were frayed. "I'm fine, just thinking." "I get it," Victor said. "But we've got this, Sarah. No matter what happens, we're going to find a way to end this." She appreciated his confidence, but the knot in her chest refused to loosen. After another hour of driving, they reached a narrow dirt road that wound through the forest. Victor slowed the car, navigating carefully around the potholes and fallen branches. Eventually, the road opened up to reveal a small, weathered cabin nestled among the trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a pickup truck was parked out front. "This is it," Victor said, pulling the car to a stop. Sarah's breath caught as she stared at the cabin. "Are you sure he's here?" "Only one way to find out." They stepped out of the car, the crisp forest air biting at Sarah's cheeks. The sound of birds chirping in the distance was the only noise breaking the eerie silence. As they approached the cabin, Sarah's heartbeat quickened, each step feeling heavier than the last. Victor knocked on the door, his knuckles rapping sharply against the wood. For a moment, there was no response, and Sarah's stomach twisted with anxiety. But then, the door creaked open, revealing a man in his early 50s with disheveled hair and tired eyes. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans, and the stubble on his face suggested he hadn't shaved in days. Dr. Henry Maddox. His eyes darted between Sarah and Victor, suspicion clouding his gaze. "Who are you?" Victor didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We need to talk about New Dawn Medical." "Doctor." Maddox's face went pale, and he quickly tried to close the door, but Victor blocked it with his foot. "We're not here to hurt you," Victor said firmly. "We just need answers." Dr. Maddox hesitated, his gaze flickering to Sarah. "Who are you?" he repeated, his voice softer this time. "My name is Sarah Collins," she said, her voice trembling. "My daughter was one of your subjects, Emily Collins. You're going to tell me what you did to her." Dr. Maddox's shoulders sagged, and for a moment he looked like a man carrying the weight of 1,000 regrets. He stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. The inside of the cabin was small and cluttered, with papers and books scattered across the kitchen table. A kettle whistled on the stove, and Dr. Maddox quickly turned it off before sitting down. "You have to understand," he said, his voice strained. "I didn't know what they were planning when I joined the project. They told me it was about saving lives, creating immune systems that could resist deadly diseases. But it wasn't until later that I realized what they were really doing." Sarah sat across from him, her hands trembling. "What were they doing?" Dr. Maddox ran a hand through his hair, his eyes haunted. "They weren't just studying immune systems. They were trying to create a new generation of children who could be controlled, genetically engineered to serve specific purposes. Emily wasn't the only one. There were others, but she was special. Her genetic profile was exactly what they were looking for." Sarah's breath hitched. "Why? What made her special?" "There's something unique in her DNA, Doctor," Maddox explained. "A mutation that enhances her natural immunity and makes her body respond differently to genetic modifications. The babies she had, those children are the key to everything New Dawn is trying to achieve. If they get their hands on them, they'll use them as a blueprint to create more children like them." Tears streamed down Sarah's face as the full weight of the truth sank in. "So they won't stop until they have her back?" "No," Dr. Maddox said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They won't." Victor leaned forward, his expression hard. "Then tell us how to stop them." Dr. Maddox hesitated, then stood and walked to a bookshelf in the corner of the room. He pulled out a thick binder filled with documents and handed it to Victor. "Everything you need to expose them is in here, but you have to be careful. The people funding this project are powerful. If they find out you have this, they'll come for you." "We're ready," Victor said, tucking the binder under his arm. Sarah stood, her legs shaking. "Thank you," she whispered, "for telling us the truth." Dr. Maddox met her gaze, guilt and sorrow etched into his features. "I'm sorry I didn't do more to stop them, but you have a chance to finish what I couldn't." As they left the cabin and headed back to the car, Sarah felt a mix of relief and dread. They finally had the truth, but now they had to figure out how to use it before time ran out. The drive back home was cloaked in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound filling the car. Trees blurred past the windows, their bare branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Victor kept his focus on the road, but Sarah could feel the tension radiating from him. The weight of what they had learned from Dr. Maddox hung between them like a storm cloud, threatening to burst at any moment. Sarah stared out the window, her breath fogging up the glass. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. Emily's genetic mutation, the babies being considered the blueprint, and the powerful people funding this nightmare. The binder resting on Victor's lap was a ticking time bomb. If they could get the information to the right people, they could expose New Dawn Medical. But if the wrong people discovered they had it, the consequences could be deadly. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw Emily's name on the screen. Her heart squeezed as she quickly answered. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," Emily replied, but there was a hint of nervousness in her voice. "I just wanted to know when you're coming home. It feels weird without you here." Sarah's chest tightened. "We're on our way, honey. We'll be there soon." "Okay." There was a pause, then Emily added, "Mom, do you think we're winning?" Sarah's eyes burned with unshed tears. She wanted to tell Emily that yes, they were winning, that everything would be fine. But the truth was far more complicated, and she couldn't lie to her daughter. "We're getting closer," she said softly, "and that's what matters." "I miss when things were normal," Emily whispered. "I know," Sarah replied, her voice cracking. "Me too." When the call ended, Sarah wiped her eyes and let out a shaky breath. Victor glanced at her briefly, his expression softening. "She's strong," he said, "just like her mom." Sarah forced a small smile, but the knot in her stomach didn't ease. By the time they arrived home, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. Sarah climbed out of the car, her legs stiff from the long drive. She clutched the binder tightly to her chest as Victor scanned the street, his eyes sharp and alert. "Let's get inside," he said, motioning for her to move quickly. They entered the house, locking the door behind them. The smell of dinner, roasted chicken and potatoes, wafted through the air, and Sarah's heart warmed at the thought of Emily trying to keep things normal despite everything. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table with the babies in their high chairs, their giggles filling the room. When she saw Sarah, her face lit up, and she jumped to her feet. "Mom!" Sarah set the binder on the counter and pulled her daughter into a tight hug. "I missed you," she whispered, holding her close. Emily squeezed her back. "I'm glad you're home." Victor cleared his throat, setting his bag on the floor. "I'm going to check the perimeter," he said, "just to be safe." Sarah nodded, her gaze lingering on him as he left the room. She knew he was being cautious, but the sight of him scanning for threats reminded her of how dangerous their situation still was. "Are you hungry?" Emily asked, pulling Sarah back to the present. "I made dinner with Linda's help." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "I'd love some." They sat down to eat, and for the first time in days, the atmosphere in the house felt almost normal. The babies babbled and played with their food. Emily talked about a story she was writing, and for a brief, precious moment, Sarah allowed herself to breathe. But that moment didn't last. When dinner was over and the kitchen was cleaned, Victor returned, his expression grim. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. Sarah's stomach dropped. "What is it?" "In the documents Maddox gave us, there's a section on New Dawn's retrieval tactics," Victor said. "They're methodical. They watch their targets for days, sometimes weeks, before making a move. That black SUV we saw last night wasn't just a scare tactic. They're gathering intel." Sarah felt like the ground was slipping out from under her. "So what do we do?" "We have to split up," Victor said, "at least for now." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. "Split up? No, I can't." "Listen to me," Victor interrupted gently. "They know where you live. If we stay here, we're giving them exactly what they want, an easy target. But if you take Emily and the babies somewhere safe, I can stay behind and create a diversion. Make them think you're still here while Mark works on releasing the evidence." Panic clawed at Sarah's chest. The thought of leaving the only place that felt like home, of running again, made her heart ache. But she knew Victor was right. Staying put was no longer an option. "Where would we go?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's a cabin a few hours from here," Victor said. "It belongs to a friend of mine. It's off the grid, no internet, no cell service. You'll be safe there." Tears pricked at the corners of Sarah's eyes as she glanced at Emily, who was sitting quietly, her wide eyes filled with fear. "Emily, honey, can you take the babies upstairs and start packing some things for them?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. She scooped one of the babies into her arms and led the other up the stairs, leaving Sarah and Victor alone in the kitchen. "Are you sure this is the right move?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I wouldn't suggest it if I wasn't," Victor said. "But you have to trust me. Once Mark releases the evidence, they won't have the power to come after you anymore. This is just temporary." Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek and took a deep breath. "Okay, we'll leave tonight." Victor reached across the table and placed a hand on hers. "You're doing the right thing." She nodded, though her heart felt like it was being ripped in two. A few hours later, the car was packed, and Sarah stood in the doorway of the house, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings one last time. The photos on the walls, the worn couch, the scent of lavender from the candles she always kept lit. It was all a part of her life. And she didn't know when she'd see it again. Victor stood by the car, his gaze serious. "I'll be in touch as soon as it's safe." Sarah turned to him, her voice thick with emotion. "Be careful, Victor." He gave her a small nod. "You too." With one final glance at the house, Sarah climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. Emily sat in the back with the babies, her face pressed against the window as they pulled away from the only home she had ever known. As they drove down the dark road, Sarah gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing with everything that lay ahead. She didn't know how long they would be on the run, or when this nightmare would end. But one thing was certain. She would do whatever it took to protect her family, no matter the cost. The winding dirt road stretched endlessly through the dense forest, its narrow path lined with towering trees that seemed to watch Sarah's every move. The sound of gravel crunching beneath the tires was the only noise cutting through the silence of the night. And even that felt too loud. The babies were asleep in the back seat, their soft breaths creating a rhythm that for once brought a small sense of comfort. Emily sat quietly next to them, her head resting against the window. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced shapes in the fogged-up glass, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Sarah could sense her daughter's fear without Emily saying a word. She knew it, because she felt the same way. The cabin Victor had told them about was still an hour away, hidden deep in the mountains. With no cell service and no way for New Dawn Medical to track them, it was supposed to be safe. But the weight pressing down on Sarah's chest told her that safety was temporary. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel as her mind replayed the conversation she had had with Victor before they left. Stick to the plan. Don't take any unnecessary risks. I'll handle things on my end. It sounded simple enough. But in reality, everything about this felt like a risk. They were running, hiding, relying on people they barely knew. And even though she trusted Victor, the doubt that lived in the back of her mind refused to be silenced. "Mom?" Emily's voice broke through the silence. Sarah glanced at her daughter through the rearview mirror. "Yeah, sweetheart. Do you think Victor's okay?" Sarah hesitated, not wanting to lie but also not wanting to scare her. "He's strong. He knows what he's doing." Emily looked down, her fingers tracing faster patterns against the window. "I don't want anything bad to happen to him. He's the first person in a long time who's actually trying to help us." The truth of that statement hit Sarah harder than she expected. Over the past year, they had been let down by so many people. Police officers who gave up, investigators who stopped returning their calls, friends who distanced themselves once the search for Emily became too difficult. But Victor had stayed. He had risked everything for them. "Victor will be fine," Sarah said firmly. "And so will we." Emily gave a small nod, but the worry in her eyes didn't fade. An hour later, they arrived at the cabin. It was small and weathered, with a sloped roof and wooden steps leading up to a porch that creaked under Sarah's weight as she carried the babies inside. The forest surrounded them like a protective wall, the dense trees casting long shadows across the ground. There were no streetlights, no neighbors, just the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. Emily followed close behind, clutching her backpack tightly as she stepped inside. "It's kind of creepy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah set the babies down on the makeshift crib that had been set up in the corner of the main room. "It's not creepy. It's quiet. That's what we need right now." Emily wandered over to the window, peering out into the darkness. "Do you think they'll find us here?" "No," Sarah said more confidently than she felt. "They don't know about this place." Emily didn't respond, but her fingers pressed against the window frame, as if she were waiting for something or someone to appear out of the woods. Sarah walked over and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I know you're scared, Emily. I am too, but we've come this far. And we're not giving up now." Emily turned to face her, tears brimming in her eyes. "What if it's not enough, Mom? What if no matter what we do, they still come for us?" Sarah knelt down, looking her daughter in the eyes. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady. "We are not powerless. They might have money, resources, and people watching us, but they don't have what we have." Emily sniffled, wiping her eyes. "What do we have?" "We have each other," Sarah said. "And I promise you, as long as I'm breathing, I will do everything I can to protect you and your brothers. They'll have to go through me to get to you." For the first time that night, Emily managed a small, shaky smile. "Okay." Sarah hugged her tightly, holding on as if her embrace could shield Emily from everything they were running from. The night deepened, and the cabin fell into silence as Emily and the babies drifted off to sleep. But Sarah remained awake, sitting by the small window with a flashlight in one hand and Victor's binder in the other. She flipped through the pages for what felt like the 100th time, studying the notes, diagrams, and lists of names. Dr. Maddox's words echoed in her mind. The babies are the key to everything. That phrase haunted her. What did it mean for their future? For Emily's future? If New Dawn considered them valuable, then simply hiding wouldn't be enough. She needed a permanent solution, a way to make sure New Dawn could never touch her family again. A loud crack outside jolted her from her thoughts. Her head snapped toward the window, her heart pounding. She strained to listen, holding her breath as the wind whistled through the trees. But after a moment, the forest returned to its usual quiet hum. Just a branch, she told herself, though her heart didn't slow. Setting the binder aside, she grabbed the flashlight and quietly stepped outside. The air was crisp, and the forest floor crunched beneath her shoes. She scanned the perimeter of the cabin, her breath visible in the cold night air. Nothing. But as she turned to head back inside, she spotted something that made her blood run cold. A footprint in the dirt. Her breath hitched as she crouched down to get a closer look. It was fresh, the edges still defined, and it was too large to be hers or Emily's. Panic surged through her, and she bolted back inside, locking the door behind her. She raced up the stairs to Emily's room, her heart pounding. Emily was fast asleep, curled under the blankets, with the babies resting peacefully in the crib beside her. Sarah's breath came in short gasps as she leaned against the doorframe. Trying to calm herself. Stay calm, she told herself. They don't know you saw it, you have time. But even as she repeated those words, she knew the clock was ticking. Victor had warned her that New Dawn was patient, but they were also relentless. She couldn't afford to wait for them to make the first move. Tomorrow, she would call Victor and Mark, and they would figure out their next step. Because Sarah wasn't just running anymore. She was ready to fight. As she closed Emily's door and leaned against the wall, one thought pulsed through her mind. They think we're weak, they think we're scared. Her jaw clenched. They're wrong. The morning sunlight filtered through the trees, casting soft patches of golden light on the wooden floor of the cabin. The air smelled of fresh pine and damp earth, but the serene surroundings did little to calm Sarah's nerves. She had barely slept, haunted by the image of the footprint she had found outside the cabin. She stood by the kitchen sink, staring out the window at the dense forest that surrounded them. Every rustle of leaves, every chirp of a bird, made her heart skip a beat. She had promised Emily that they would be safe here, but now that promise felt fragile, like glass teetering on the edge of a table. Behind her, the babies were playing on the floor, their giggles momentarily cutting through the tension in her chest. Emily sat nearby, drawing pictures in her notebook, her face calm, but her eyes occasionally flicking toward the window. Sarah knew her daughter was just as on edge as she was. The sound of the phone ringing shattered the quiet. Sarah grabbed it from the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she answered. "Hello? It's Victor?" His familiar voice came through, steady but urgent. "Mark just sent me an update. We have a problem." Sarah's breath hitched. "What kind of problem?" "They're making their move," Victor said. "We intercepted a message between two of New Dawn's operatives. They know you're at the cabin. I don't know how, but they do." Panic surged through her veins. "How much time do we have?" "Not long," Victor replied. "I'm already on my way, but I need you to be ready. Pack up whatever you can. I'll meet you at the old service road a few miles from the cabin." Sarah glanced at Emily, who was now looking up from her notebook, her brows furrowed with concern. "I can't leave the babies out here in the open," Sarah whispered into the phone. "What if they block the road before we can get to you?" "They won't," Victor assured her. "I have a plan to slow them down, but you have to trust me." Sarah closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe. "Okay, I'll be ready." As soon as she hung up, she turned to Emily, who was now standing. "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah knelt in front of her daughter, gripping her hands tightly. "We have to leave, sweetheart. They found us." Emily's eyes widened, but to Sarah's relief, she didn't panic. "What do we do?" "We're going to pack a few things, just the essentials, and we're going to meet Victor down the road." Emily nodded, her small hands trembling slightly but her resolve clear. "Okay." Within minutes, Sarah had packed a bag with food, water, and warm clothes. Emily helped gather the baby's diapers and bottles. Her movements quick but focused. They worked in silence, the tension in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah strapped the babies into their carriers and slung one over each shoulder. Emily carried the bag of supplies, her grip tight as they stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The forest around them was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves absent, as if the world itself knew what was coming. "Stay close to me," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. They made their way down the narrow dirt path that led away from the cabin, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the damp forest floor. Sarah's eyes darted in every direction, her ears straining for any sign of movement. Halfway down the path, the crunch of leaves behind them made her freeze. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. A man in a black jacket was standing about 50 yards away, his face partially hidden by the shadow of the trees. He wasn't moving, but his presence alone was enough to send a wave of fear crashing over her. "Go," Sarah whispered to Emily, nudging her forward. "Run." "But Mom, now!" Emily obeyed, sprinting down the path with the bag slung over her shoulder. Sarah adjusted the baby's carriers and took off after her, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The sound of footsteps behind her grew louder, and she didn't dare look back. The path curved sharply to the left, and Sarah grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her off the trail and into the dense underbrush. They crouched behind a thick cluster of trees, their breaths ragged as they listened to the footsteps grow closer. The man's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. "They're close, fan out and find them." Sarah's blood turned to ice. There was more than one. She clutched Emily's hand tightly, her mind racing. They couldn't outrun them, not with the baby slowing them down. They needed a diversion. Something to buy them time. Her gaze fell on a fallen branch nearby, its dried leaves crackling as the wind brushed past it. Without thinking, she grabbed a small rock from the ground and hurled it toward the branch. It hit with a loud crack, the sound echoing through the forest. The footsteps hesitated, then shifted in the direction of the noise. "Over there!" one of the men shouted. Sarah didn't wait. She pulled Emily to her feet and took off in the opposite direction, her legs burning as she pushed through the thick underbrush. Branches scratched at her arms and face, but she didn't slow down. The babies whimpered softly, but they stayed quiet enough for her to keep moving without giving away their location. Finally, the dense trees gave way to the old service road Victor had mentioned. Sarah's chest heaved as she scanned the area, her heart pounding in her ears. And then she saw him. Victor's car came into view, its engine running and the passenger door wide open. He waved frantically, motioning for them to hurry. Sarah didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the car, her legs screaming in protest. Emily reached it first, diving into the back seat as Victor jumped out to help Sarah with the babies. He grabbed one of the carriers and placed it gently in the back, then ushered Sarah into the passenger seat. As soon as the door slammed shut, Victor floored the gas pedal, the tires kicking up dirt and gravel as they sped down the road. "Are you okay?" Victor asked, his eyes darting between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. Sarah nodded, though her breath came in short, uneven gasps. "They were right behind us." "I know," Victor said grimly. "But they won't be for long." He reached over and pressed a button on a small device attached to the dashboard. Sarah didn't know what it was, but a few seconds later, a deafening explosion echoed through the forest. The shockwave rattled the car, and Sarah whipped her head around to see a plume of smoke rising in the distance. "What was that?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Plan B," Victor said, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I set up a trap near the cabin in case they found you before I could get there. It'll slow them down, but we still need to keep moving." Emily leaned forward from the back seat. her face pale. "Where are we going now?" "Somewhere they won't expect." Victor replied, his gaze hard. "Mark has a safe house a few towns over. It's off the grid, and they won't be able to track us there." Sarah leaned back in her seat, her mind spinning. They had narrowly escaped this time, but how many more close calls could they survive? The men chasing them weren't just random operatives, they were professionals, trained to track and capture their targets. But as Sarah glanced at Emily and the babies, her determination solidified. They had come too far to give up now. No matter what it took, she would protect her family. She had the will to fight, and she wasn't backing down. The car rumbled down the empty road, the engine humming steadily as the forest slowly gave way to open fields, bathed in the soft glow of morning light. The adrenaline that had carried Sarah through the night was starting to wear off, leaving her body heavy and her mind clouded with exhaustion. She leaned her head against the window, watching the scenery blur past, but her thoughts were fixed on the explosion they had left behind. She could still hear the echo of it. Feel the vibration beneath her feet as the ground shook. It had bought them time, but how much? Victor hadn't said, and she hadn't dared to ask. In the back seat, Emily sat quietly, stroking the soft curls of one of the babies while the other slept peacefully beside her. Her eyes were half closed, but Sarah could see the tension in her daughter's shoulders, the weight of the fear they were all carrying. Victor's voice broke the silence. "We should be there in about 30 minutes. Mark's safe house is tucked away in a small town just off the main highway. We'll be able to rest there for a while." Sarah nodded, her gaze still fixed on the window. "Do you think they'll find us again?" "They'll try," Victor admitted, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "But we have an advantage now. They don't know about the safe house, and we have something they don't, proof. Once Mark leaks those documents, New Dawn won't be able to operate in the shadows anymore." Sarah let out a shaky breath. "What if they don't stop even after we expose them?" Victor glanced at her, his eyes softening. "Then we fight them another way. We've come this far, Sarah. Don't lose hope now." She wanted to believe him, but the doubt in her heart was hard to ignore. As they continued down the road, the landscape shifted again, giving way to small farms and clusters of trees. Victor turned onto a gravel driveway that led to a modest cottage tucked behind a row of oak trees. The house was simple, with a wooden porch and flower boxes lining the windows. It looked like the kind of place where life moved slowly, where people didn't ask questions. Victor parked the car and cut the engine. "We're here." Sarah climbed out of the car, her legs wobbly as she adjusted the baby carrier on her shoulder. Emily followed closely, holding the hand of the other baby as they made their way up the porch steps. Victor unlocked the door and pushed it open, revealing a cozy interior with worn furniture and the faint scent of pine. "It's not fancy," Victor said, setting the bags down by the door. "But it's safe." Sarah smiled faintly. "Safe is all we need." Emily wandered into the living room, her eyes scanning the old books on the shelves and the patchwork quilt draped over the couch. "It's nice," she said softly. Sarah set the babies down on a blanket in the corner of the room and sat on the couch, her body sinking into the cushions as the weight of the past few days pressed down on her. For the first time since Emily had come home, she allowed herself to close her eyes and breathe. Victor sat across from her, his phone in hand as he typed quickly. "I'm sending Mark our location and letting him know we made it safely. He's still working on releasing the files. Once they go public, New Dawn's going to have a lot of explaining to do." The thought brought a flicker of hope to Sarah's chest. If Mark could expose them, maybe they could finally stop running. Emily climbed onto the couch next to her, resting her head on Sarah's shoulder. "Do you think it'll be over soon?" Sarah kissed the top of her daughter's head. "I hope so, sweetheart. I really do." Hours passed, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. The babies napped peacefully, their tiny bodies curled up under soft blankets, while Emily sat at the kitchen table coloring in her notebook. Victor was still on his phone, pacing back and forth as he spoke quietly with Mark. Sarah stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the gravel driveway. The silence of the countryside was unnerving, as if danger could creep up on them at any moment. She kept waiting for the sound of tires crunching on gravel, for the sight of another black SUV pulling up outside. But for now, the road remained empty. Victor ended the call and walked over to her, his expression unreadable. Mark's getting close to a breakthrough. He found someone inside New Dawn who's willing to leak more information, someone who's scared of being left to take the fall. Sarah's eyebrows lifted. They have a whistleblower? Looks like it, Victor said. But it's risky. If New Dawn finds out who it is before the files go public, they'll shut it down. Sarah's stomach twisted. What do we do? Victor crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. We wait. Mark's coordinating with a journalist who's willing to run the story. Once it's out there, it'll be impossible for them to cover it up. The thought of waiting made Sarah's skin crawl, but she knew they had no other option. They couldn't afford to act recklessly, not now when they were so close to exposing the truth. The sound of a baby crying broke the tension. Sarah rushed over to the blanket, scooping the baby into her arms and gently rocking him back and forth. His cries softened as she hummed a lullaby, the same one she used to sing to Emily when she was a baby. Emily watched from the kitchen table, her eyes soft with nostalgia. You used to sing that to me when I had bad dreams. Sarah smiled, though tears threatened to spill. I remember. Emily walked over and sat next to her, resting her head on her mother's shoulder. I'm glad we're here, she whispered. Even if it's just for a little while. Sarah hugged her tightly, her heart aching with both love and fear. Me too, baby. As night fell, the cottage was bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp. The babies were asleep again, and Emily had finally drifted off on the couch, wrapped in the patchwork quilt. Sarah sat at the kitchen table with Victor, a map spread out in front of them as they reviewed potential escape routes just in case. Victor traced a route with his finger. If they find us, this road will get us out of town quickly. It leads to a service station where we can switch vehicles. Sarah nodded, though the thought of running again made her chest tighten. Do you really think it'll come to that? Victor leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. I don't know, but we can't take any chances. Before Sarah could respond, Victor's phone buzzed. He picked it up, his eyes narrowing as he read the message. It's from Mark. The files are ready to be released. Sarah's breath hitched. This is it, isn't it? Victor nodded. Once they go public, everything changes. A wave of emotion washed over Sarah, relief, fear, hope, and exhaustion all at once. She reached across the table and squeezed Victor's hand. Thank you. For everything. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. We're not done yet, but this is a step in the right direction. As Victor typed his response to Mark, Sarah leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. For the first time in a long while, the weight on her shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. They had won this battle, but deep down Sarah knew the war wasn't over. Not yet. The wind howled outside the cottage, rattling the windows as if nature itself could sense the tension brewing inside. The small living room, dimly lit by the glow of a single lamp, felt like a fragile sanctuary, but the illusion of safety was quickly unraveling. Sarah sat on the edge of the couch, her fingers gripping the patchwork quilt draped across her lap. Emily was asleep beside her, her head resting on Sarah's shoulder. The babies slept soundly in their crib near the fireplace, their soft breaths creating a rhythm that was both comforting and nerve-wracking. Victor stood by the window, his silhouette barely visible as he stared into the darkness beyond. His phone buzzed in his hand, and Sarah watched as he read the message, his jaw tightening with every word. What is it? She asked, her voice low but filled with dread. He turned to face her, the dim light casting shadows across his face. Mark sent the files to the journalist. The story's live. Relief washed over Sarah, but it was short-lived. Then why do you look worried? Victor hesitated, then handed her the phone. On the screen was a message from Mark. They know. We have a leak. Get out now. Sarah's breath hitched. A leak? What does that mean? It means someone tipped them off before the story went live, Victor said, his voice grim. They know where you are. Panic gripped Sarah's chest like a vice. She glanced at Emily and the babies, her mind racing. How much time do we have? Victor didn't answer. Instead, he moved to the door, peering out into the night. We need to leave now. Sarah shook Emily gently, her voice trembling. Emily, wake up. We have to go. Emily blinked groggily, rubbing her eyes. What's happening? There's no time to explain, Sarah said, helping her to her feet. Just grab your bag. Emily obeyed without question, her movements quick despite the fear in her eyes. Sarah gathered the babies, wrapping them in warm blankets before placing them into their carriers. Her hands trembled as she fastened the straps, her mind replaying Victor's words. They know where you are. Victor opened the door, scanning the area one last time before motioning for them to follow. Stay close to me, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The cold night air bit at Sarah's skin as they stepped outside. The forest around them was pitch black, the towering trees casting long, menacing shadows across the gravel driveway. The wind whipped through the branches, creating a cacophony of rustling leaves and distant creaks that set Sarah's nerves on edge. Victor led them toward the car, his pace quick and determined. But just as they reached the vehicle, the distant hum of an engine sent a jolt of fear through Sarah's body. They're coming, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Victor cursed under his breath. Get in the car, now! Sarah hurried to strap the babies into their seats while Emily climbed into the back. Victor jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine, the headlights cutting through the darkness as the car roared to life. As they sped down the gravel road, the sound of the pursuing vehicle grew louder, its headlights appearing in the rearview mirror like a pair of predatory eyes. They're gaining on us, Sarah said, her heart pounding. Victor's grip on the steering wheel tightened. I know. The road twisted and turned, the tires skidding slightly as Victor navigated the sharp curves. The babies whimpered in the back seat, their cries mingling with the sound of the engine. Sarah reached back to comfort them, her voice shaking as she whispered soothing words. Suddenly, the pursuing car's headlights disappeared. Victor's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Where did they go? Sarah turned, her breath catching. The road behind them was empty, but the sense of dread didn't fade. Did they turn off somewhere? Maybe, Victor said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it. The car sped through the final stretch of the forest road, emerging onto the main highway. Victor didn't slow down. He kept his foot on the gas, his eyes scanning the road ahead. Sarah tried to steady her breathing, but the fear gnawed at her insides like a hungry beast. Where are we going now? Emily asked, her voice small. There's a secondary safe house about 20 miles from here, Victor replied. It's not as well equipped, but it'll give us time to figure out our next move. Sarah nodded, though her instincts told her that they were running out of time. They reached the safe house just before dawn. The small cabin was tucked away behind a thicket of trees, its wooden exterior weathered and covered in moss. Victor parked the car and scanned the area before ushering them inside. The inside of the cabin was dark and cold, with only a few pieces of furniture scattered throughout the single room. Sarah set the babies down on a blanket and wrapped them in extra layers to keep them warm. Emily sat next to them, her arms wrapped around her knees. Victor stood by the door, his phone in hand. I need to call Mark and see if he has any updates. Sarah nodded, but her attention was drawn to Emily, who was staring at the floor, her shoulders shaking. Emily. Sarah knelt beside her, placing a hand on her back. What's wrong, sweetheart? Emily looked up, tears streaming down her face. I'm scared, Mom. What if we can't get away this time? Sarah's throat tightened, but she forced herself to stay strong. We're going to get through this, she said, brushing a strand of hair from Emily's face. I won't let them take you, I promise. Emily sniffled, wiping her eyes. You always say that. I mean it, Sarah whispered. I've never meant it more. Victor ended his call and turned to face them, his expression grim. We have a new problem. Sarah's heart sank. What now? The whistleblower Mark was working with just went dark, Victor said. No communication, no updates. We think New Dawn found them. Fear gripped Sarah's chest like a vice. "So what does that mean for us?" "It means they'll be more desperate," Victor replied. "The story is out there, but they'll do whatever it takes to control the damage. And right now, we're the biggest threat to them." The room fell into silence, the weight of his words pressing down on all of them. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to panic, not now. "What do we do?" Victor hesitated for a moment before meeting her gaze. "We go on the offensive. If they're going to come after us, we make sure they don't walk away." Sarah nodded, her fear slowly giving way to a new emotion: determination. They had been running long enough. Now it was time to fight back. The early morning light filtered through the cracks in the cabin's wooden walls, casting faint beams across the floor. Outside, the forest was waking up, the sound of birdsong mixing with the rustling of leaves. But inside, the air was suffocating with tension, and time felt like it was slipping away faster than Sarah could keep up. She sat on the floor, cradling one of the babies in her arms, while Emily dozed off against her side. The little boy had fallen back to sleep, his tiny fingers clutching Sarah's shirt as his chest rose and fell in peaceful rhythm. It was a cruel contrast to the storm of fear raging inside her. Victor paced near the door, his phone pressed to his ear as he tried, again, to reach Mark. But the call went straight to voicemail. Just like the last 3 attempts, he hung up and let out a frustrated sigh. Still nothing. Sarah bit her lip, her mind racing. If New Dawn has their whistleblower and Mark can't reach them, what's stopping them from coming after us full force? Victor rubbed the back of his neck, his gaze dark. "Nothing. That's why we can't stay here much longer." He hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking, maybe it's time we split up." Sarah's heart clenched. "What? No, we can't." "Listen to me," Victor said, kneeling in front of her, his voice steady but urgent. "We've done everything we can to protect you and the kids. But the closer they get, the harder it's going to be to keep you safe. If I stay behind and draw their attention, you'll have a better chance of getting away." Sarah's breath hitched as her mind tried to process his words. "You want to be bait? Victor, they'll kill you." "Maybe," Victor said, his jaw tightening. "But they won't find you. That's the point." Tears stung Sarah's eyes as she clutched the baby closer to her chest. There has to be another way. If there was, don't you think I'd take it? Victor's voice softened, and for the first time, Sarah saw the vulnerability hidden beneath his tough exterior. "You and Emily are the closest thing I've had to a family in a long time. I'm not doing this because I want to. I'm doing it because it's the only way to give you a chance." Sarah's tears spilled over, but she shook her head, refusing to accept his plan. "I can't let you do this, Victor. I can't lose you too." Victor reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "You're not losing me. I'm choosing this, Sarah, for you, for Emily, for those babies." His hand lingered for a moment before he pulled it away, his voice hardening. "I've made up my mind, but I need you to trust me to finish this." Sarah sobbed quietly, her body trembling with the weight of what he was asking. She wanted to fight him, to argue that there had to be another way, but deep down she knew he was right. Victor stood, his gaze shifting to Emily, who was still asleep. "She's going to need you. You have to be strong for her, Sarah." Sarah nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Where will you go?" "I'll head back to the old service road and double back toward the secondary safe house," Victor said. "I've got a few tricks up my sleeve to keep them chasing me while you head north. There's a safe house in Blackwood that Mark mentioned. It's remote, but it'll keep you off their radar." Sarah's hands trembled as she placed the baby back in the crib and stood. "How will I know you're okay?" Victor smiled faintly, but the sadness in his eyes betrayed him. "You won't. But if everything goes according to plan, you'll never have to worry about me again." Sarah stepped forward and hugged him tightly, her tears soaking into his jacket. "I don't know how to say goodbye," she whispered. Victor held her close, his arms wrapped protectively around her. "Then don't," he whispered back. "Just promise me you'll keep going, no matter what." She nodded against his chest, the warmth of his embrace temporarily easing her fear. I promise." When she finally pulled away, Victor's face was calm, but his eyes were glassy. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face before turning toward the door. "Tell Emily I said goodbye," he said, his voice cracking. Sarah's chest tightened as she watched him walk out the door and disappear into the morning fog. The sound of the door clicking shut felt final, like the closing of a chapter she wasn't ready to end. The sun had fully risen by the time Sarah packed the car. Her movements mechanical as she loaded the bags and secured the babies in their seats. Emily sat in the back, her face pale and her lips pressed into a thin line. "Where's Victor?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah paused, her hand resting on the door. "He had to go ahead of us," she said, her throat tightening. "He's making sure we get a safe path to the next place." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He's not coming back, is he?" Sarah's heart broke at the sound of her daughter's voice. She climbed into the car and pulled Emily into a hug. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking. "But we have to believe that he will. Victor wouldn't want us to give up hope." Emily sniffled, her small arms wrapping tightly around Sarah. "I'm going to miss him." "Me too, baby," Sarah whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. "Me too." They drove in silence, the winding road stretching endlessly ahead of them. The forest thinned out, giving way to open farmland and distant hills. Sarah kept her eyes on the road, but her thoughts were with Victor, wondering where he was and if he was safe. An hour into the drive, her phone buzzed. She pulled over to the side of the road and checked the screen. It was a message from Victor. "Made contact. Don't stop. Keep moving. You're almost there." Tears blurred her vision as she reread the message, her heart swelling with both relief and heartbreak. He was still out there, still fighting for them. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes, and turned to Emily. "We're going to be okay," she said, her voice steady. "Victor's making sure of it." Emily nodded, her gaze distant but hopeful. Sarah pulled back onto the road, her grip on the steering wheel tightening. She didn't know what lay ahead or if Victor would survive his mission. But she did know one thing. She wouldn't waste the chance he had given them. The road stretched on, winding through the hills like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. And with every mile they traveled, Sarah's resolve grew stronger. They had lost so much. But they weren't done fighting. Not yet. The safe house in Blackwood was exactly as Victor had described it. Remote, quiet, and tucked away in a clearing surrounded by dense woods. The cabin was small, with only 2 rooms, but it felt secure. The thick logs that made up the walls seemed impenetrable, and the single road leading in was hidden beneath a canopy of trees. Sarah parked the car and stepped outside, her boots crunching against the gravel. The crisp mountain air was laced with the scent of pine, but it did little to calm her frayed nerves. She could still feel the weight of Victor's absence pressing down on her chest, and every rustle of leaves made her flinch. Emily climbed out of the car, holding the bag of supplies while Sarah carried the babies inside. The cabin was sparsely furnished, with a small kitchen, a worn couch, and a fireplace that looked like it hadn't been used in years. "Is this where we're staying now?" Emily asked, her voice small. "For a little while," Sarah replied, setting the babies down on a blanket by the fireplace, "just until Victor sends word that it's safe to move again." Emily sat on the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. "Do you think he's okay?" Sarah hesitated, unsure of how to answer. She didn't want to lie, but the truth was too painful to admit. "I think Victor's doing everything he can to keep us safe. That's what matters right now." Emily nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the floor. Sarah knelt beside the babies, gently tucking their blankets around them as they dozed off. She ran her fingers through their soft hair, her heart aching at the thought of how much they had been through in their short lives. "Victor gave us this chance. I can't waste it." She stood and walked to the window, peering out into the dense forest. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. But beneath the peaceful exterior, Sarah could feel the tension building, like a storm waiting to break. Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she quickly pulled it out, hoping it was Victor. But the screen displayed an unknown number. Her heart raced as she debated whether to answer. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the button and held the phone to her ear. "Hello?" There was a pause, followed by the sound of static. "Bye." Then a voice she didn't recognize spoke, cold and calculated. "Mrs. Collins." Sarah's breath hitched. "Who is this?" "That doesn't matter," the man replied. "What matters is that we know exactly where you are." Her blood ran cold. She gripped the edge of the windowsill, her knuckles turning white. "You're lying." The man chuckled, the sound sending a chill down her spine. "Am I? You're in a cabin in Blackwood. A nice little hideout, but it won't keep us out for long." Sarah's mind raced. How had they found her? Had someone followed them? Had Victor's diversion failed? "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "The babies," the man said simply. "And Emily." Sarah's knees nearly buckled, but she forced herself to stay upright. "You'll never get them." "We will," the man said confidently. "But if you hand them over willingly, we can make this easier on you. No one has to get hurt." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. "I'm not handing over my children." "Then you leave us no choice," the man said. "You have until dawn. After that, we're coming in." The line went dead. Sarah lowered the phone, her hands trembling. She turned to Emily, who was watching her with wide, fearful eyes. "Mom, what's wrong?" "They know where we are," Sarah whispered, barely able to get the words out. "They're coming." Emily's face paled and she clutched the arm of the couch. "What do we do?" Sarah paced the room, her mind racing. They couldn't run. There wasn't enough time, and hiding would only delay the inevitable. The only option left was to fight. But how could she protect Emily and the babies against trained operatives? Her gaze fell on the fireplace and an idea began to form. It was risky, but it might be their only chance. "Emily," she said, kneeling in front of her daughter, "I need you to be brave, okay? I'm going to set a trap." Emily's brow furrowed. "A trap?" Sarah nodded, her voice steadying as the plan took shape in her mind. "I'm going to block off the main door and windows with whatever we can find. Then I'm going to set a fire in the fireplace. When they come, the smoke will force them to break through the back entrance, and that's where we'll surprise them." Emily's eyes widened. "But what if it doesn't work?" Sarah cupped her daughter's face in her hands, forcing her to meet her gaze. "It has to. Do you trust me?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "I trust you." They worked quickly, barricading the front door with a heavy wooden dresser and covering the windows with blankets to trap the smoke inside. Sarah gathered kindling and logs, piling them into the fireplace before striking a match. The fire roared to life, its heat filling the room as smoke began to curl toward the ceiling. "Stay low," Sarah instructed Emily, helping her crawl under the table with the babies. "No matter what happens, don't come out until I say it's safe." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Be careful." "Mom." "I will," Sarah whispered, kissing her forehead. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace and positioned herself near the back entrance, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The cabin was quickly filling with smoke, and her eyes stung as she tried to stay focused. Then she heard it, the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Sarah's grip on the poker tightened as the footsteps stopped just outside the back door. There was a brief pause, and then the sound of the door being kicked in. The first man stepped inside, his face hidden beneath a black mask. He scanned the room, coughing as the thick smoke clouded his vision. Sarah held her breath, waiting until he was close enough. Then she struck. The poker connected with his leg, and the man crumpled to the floor with a grunt of pain. Before he could recover, Sarah swung again, hitting him in the shoulder and sending him sprawling. But she didn't have time to celebrate. The second man burst through the door, lunging toward her with a knife. Sarah dodged, her breath coming in short gasps as she swung the poker again, this time catching him in the side. The man staggered but didn't fall. He lunged again and Sarah stumbled backward, her foot catching on the edge of the rug. She hit the floor hard. The air knocked from her lungs as the man loomed over her. A loud crash echoed through the cabin, and suddenly the man was yanked backward. Sarah gasped as Victor appeared, slamming the man against the wall and knocking him unconscious. "Victor," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He helped her to her feet, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you okay?" She nodded, barely able to speak. "How did you find us?" "I never lost you," Victor said, his voice filled with relief. "I was tracking them the whole time. I couldn't let them get to you." Sarah threw her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. "I thought you were gone." "Not yet," Victor said, holding her tightly. "We're not done fighting." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah believed him. The morning sun cast its soft golden rays over the forest clearing, making the dew-covered leaves shimmer like tiny crystals. The cabin, now quiet again, sat nestled among the trees as if the chaos of the previous night had never happened. But inside, the air was thick with the aftermath of what could have been their final stand. Sarah sat on the floor near the fireplace, cradling a warm mug of tea in her trembling hands. Her body ached from the fight, and her head throbbed with exhaustion, but she couldn't relax, not yet. The cabin's front door hung slightly ajar, splintered and damaged from the intruders, and the smell of lingering smoke clung to her clothes. But they were alive. Victor leaned against the kitchen counter, the eye. A bag of frozen peas pressed against his bruised ribs. His face was bruised too, but there was a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. A quiet victory. On the couch, Emily curled under a blanket, the baby sleeping beside her. Sarah watched her daughter's chest rise and fall in a steady rhythm, and felt a wave of emotion crash over her. They had made it through the night, but not without scars. "You should rest," Victor said, breaking the silence. "You've earned it." Sarah shook her head, her gaze never leaving Emily. "I can't. Not until I know this is over." Victor exhaled and sat down at the kitchen table, wincing slightly as he adjusted the frozen peas against his side. "It's not over yet, but we dealt them a serious blow last night. They didn't expect us to fight back like that. They'll regroup, but it'll take them time." Sarah's hands tightened around the mug. "What if we don't have time? What if they come back before we're ready?" "They won't," Victor said firmly. "I contacted Mark this morning. The files went viral, news outlets, online forums, whistleblower sites. New Dawn is officially exposed. Their investors are pulling out, their labs are being raided, and their operatives are being questioned." He leaned forward, his voice softening. "We did it, Sarah. You did it." The words should have felt like a relief, but instead they brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She set the mug down and buried her face in her hands, the weight of everything finally crashing down on her. Victor was at her side in an instant, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe now." Sarah sobbed quietly, her body trembling as she let go of the fear she had been holding on to for so long. "I thought I was going to lose her again," she choked out. "I thought they were going to take her, and I wouldn't be able to stop them." Victor pulled her into a gentle hug, letting her cry against his chest. "You didn't lose her. You fought for her and you won." They stayed like that for a while, the sound of Sarah's quiet sobs mixing with the soft breathing of the babies. Finally, she pulled away, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. "I just want her to have a normal life," she whispered. "I want all of them to be happy." "They will be," Victor said, his voice steady. "It'll take time, but they'll heal. And so will you." Sarah glanced toward the couch, where Emily stirred slightly but didn't wake. "I hope you're right." "I am," Victor said with a small smile. "Because they have you." Later that afternoon, after the cabin had been cleaned up and the broken door temporarily secured, Sarah and Emily sat outside on the porch, watching the trees sway gently in the breeze. The babies were napping inside, and for the first time in days, the world felt still. Emily hugged her knees to her chest, her gaze distant. "Mom?" "Yeah, sweetheart?" Emily hesitated, then looked up. "Do you think the people from New Dawn will ever come back for us?" Sarah's heart ached at the fear hidden in her daughter's voice. She reached over and took Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "No, honey, they won't." "But how do you know for sure?" Sarah exhaled slowly. choosing her words carefully. Because we took away their power. They can't hide in the shadows anymore. The whole world knows what they did, and they'll be held accountable. And if anyone ever tries to hurt us again, we'll be ready. Emily nodded, but her eyes were still clouded with doubt. I'm scared it'll never really be over. Sarah scooted closer, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. I know it's hard to believe right now, but you're safe. I promise. And we're going to find a way to live without looking over our shoulders. Emily rested her head against Sarah's shoulder, her small body relaxing slightly. I just want to feel normal again. You will, Sarah whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of Emily's head. It's going to take time, but we'll get there. They sat in silence, the sounds of the forest wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. Sarah let herself breathe, let herself imagine a future where their days weren't filled with fear and running, a future where Emily could go back to school, make friends, and be a kid again. I miss Victor, Emily said softly. Sarah's throat tightened, but she nodded. Me too. Do you think he'll come visit us? I hope so, Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly. He'll always be a part of our lives, no matter where he is. Emily seemed to find comfort in that, because she smiled faintly and closed her eyes, letting the afternoon sun warm her face. Inside the cabin, Sarah's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She stood and went to check it, her pulse quickening when she saw the message from Victor. Made it out safe. They're done. Keep living. Sarah's lips trembled as she reread the message. Her tears blurring the screen, she quickly typed a response. Thank you for everything. We'll never forget you. She set the phone down and leaned against the counter, a wave of relief washing over her. Victor had done his part, and now it was her turn. She had to build a life for Emily and the babies. A life that was free from fear. Taking a deep breath, she stepped back outside and sat next to Emily again, their hands intertwined as they watched the sun begin to set behind the trees. For the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to believe that they had a future worth fighting for. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, she knew they would face them together, because they had survived the storm. And now, it was time to rebuild. The evening sun hung low over the horizon, casting long golden streaks across the quiet clearing surrounding the cabin. Sarah stood in the kitchen, preparing dinner while the faint crackle of the fireplace filled the room. The babies cooed softly on their blanket, playing with the toys Emily had laid out for them. From the porch, Sarah could hear the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair where Emily sat, humming a tune that made Sarah's heart ache with nostalgia. She stirred the pot on the stove absent-mindedly, her mind drifting to Victor's last message. Keep living. The weight of those words had stuck with her all day. For so long, her life had been about surviving, running, and protecting her family. Now, with New Dawn Medical dismantled and their secrets exposed, the question lingered, what did living even mean anymore? The knock on the door was soft, almost hesitant. Sarah froze, her hand gripping the wooden spoon tightly. Her pulse quickened, and for a brief moment, she wondered if it could be one of New Dawn's operatives returning for revenge. But logic quickly took over. They wouldn't knock. Whoever was at the door wasn't here to harm them. She set the spoon down, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and made her way to the door. Emily had already peeked through the window and was standing by the door, her eyes wide with curiosity. Who is it? Sarah asked. Emily shrugged. I don't know. A man. I didn't get a good look. Sarah's heart thumped against her ribs as she slowly unlocked the door and pulled it open. Standing on the porch, with the sun casting a golden halo around him, was Victor. His jacket was worn, his hair slightly disheveled, and there was a small cut on his cheek that hadn't fully healed. But his eyes, the same eyes that had been her lifeline through the darkest moments, were warm and familiar. Sarah's breath hitched. Victor. Hey, he said, his voice soft but steady. I told you I'd find you again. Before she could respond, Emily let out a delighted cry and threw herself into his arms. Victor laughed, lifting her off the ground and holding her tightly. Missed you, kiddo. Emily's voice was muffled against his jacket. I thought you were gone. Not a chance, Victor said, gently setting her down. Sarah stood frozen in place, her hands trembling as tears filled her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she had missed him until this moment, until he was standing right in front of her, alive and safe. Victor's gaze met hers, and for a moment the world around them faded. I couldn't stay away, he admitted, stepping forward. I needed to make sure you were okay. Sarah wiped her tears away, a soft laugh escaping her lips. We're okay, thanks to you. He hesitated, then pulled her into a hug. She melted into him, her head resting against his chest as the weight of the past few weeks lifted slightly. His arms were warm and steady, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. When they finally pulled apart, Victor glanced inside the cabin. Looks like you've got things under control here. Sarah smiled faintly. We're getting there. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him as Emily ran back to the babies. The warm glow of the fire bathed the room, and for the first time in weeks, the cabin didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like a home. Victor leaned against the kitchen counter, his gaze soft as he watched Sarah stir the pot on the stove. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me again, he said quietly. Sarah turned to him, her brow furrowing. Why would you think that? Because I wasn't sure if you'd want a reminder of everything you've been through, he admitted. I didn't want to bring any more chaos into your life. Sarah set the spoon down and walked over to him, her heart pounding. You didn't bring chaos, Victor. You brought us hope. I don't think I would have made it without you. He exhaled, relief washing over his face. I've been keeping an eye on things from a distance. Mark told me about the arrests and the investigations. New Dawn is finished, Sarah. They're not coming back. Hearing those words made her knees feel weak. It's really over? Victor nodded. It's over. A sob escaped her, but this time it was one of relief. She covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face, and Victor was there instantly, pulling her into another hug. You're free now, he whispered. You don't have to run anymore. They sat at the kitchen table that night, the warm glow of the fire casting flickering shadows across the walls. Emily was fast asleep on the couch with one of the babies curled up beside her. The other baby dozed peacefully in Victor's arms as he rocked gently back and forth. Sarah watched him, her heart swelling with gratitude. You're good with them, she said softly. Victor smiled down at the baby. I've had a lot of practice with other people's families. His gaze lifted, meeting hers. But I've never cared this much. Sarah's breath caught. The vulnerability in his voice was raw and real. And for the first time she realized that Victor wasn't just someone who had helped them survive. He had become part of their family. Stay, she whispered before she could stop herself. Victor blinked, as if he wasn't sure he had heard her correctly. What? Stay with us, Sarah repeated, her voice steady. I know you've always been on the move, always looking for the next fight, but you don't have to do that anymore. You can stay. Here. With us. Victor stared at her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. Are you sure? Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I've never been more sure of anything. He looked down at the baby in his arms, then back at Sarah. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the kind of smile that spoke of relief, acceptance, and maybe even a little bit of hope. I'd like that, he said softly. I'd like that a lot. Later that night, as the house fell into a peaceful silence, Sarah lay in bed with Emily curled up beside her. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow over the room. She listened to the sounds of the forest outside, the rustling leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and felt for the first time that those sounds weren't a warning of danger. They were a lullaby, a promise of a new beginning. Sarah closed her eyes and let herself believe it. They had fought, they had survived, and now they could heal. Tomorrow would be a new day. A day where they could start building the life they had fought so hard to protect. And with Victor by their side, Sarah knew they wouldn't be doing it alone. The past had tried to break them, but together they had found a way to rise, The sun rose slowly over the forest, casting its warm light across the clearing and bathing the cabin in a golden glow. Morning dew sparkled on the grass, and the smell of fresh pine drifted through the crisp air. For the first time in what felt like forever, the dawn didn't bring fear. It brought peace. Inside the cabin, Sarah stirred awake, the soft hum of the wind rustling through the trees gently pulling her from sleep. She blinked against the sunlight streaming through the window, her heart swelling as she saw Emily snuggled against her side, still fast asleep. The baby monitor on the nightstand emitted the soft sound of the twins cooing in the other room. She stretched, feeling the ache in her muscles from weeks of tension, running and fighting. But today, the ache was different, less heavy, more like a reminder of how far they had come. Carefully, she slid out of bed without waking Emily and made her way to the nursery. The babies were wide awake, their tiny arms and legs kicking excitedly as they gurgled and smiled. Sarah's heart swelled with warmth. They were safe. They were home. As she changed their diapers and dressed them for the day, she heard the faint clatter of pots and pans coming from the kitchen. She smiled softly, knowing exactly who was behind the noise. When she walked into the kitchen with the babies in her arms, she found Victor standing by the stove, flipping pancakes in a pan. His hair was slightly messy, and he was wearing a worn flannel shirt that fit him just a little too perfectly. The smell of coffee and maple syrup filled the air, making the cabin feel even cozier. "Good morning," he said, flashing her a warm smile. "Good morning," Sarah replied, setting the babies in their high chairs and walking over to him. "You're making breakfast?" "Thought I'd give you a break," Victor said, pouring another ladle of batter into the pan. "Figured you deserve at least one morning where you're not doing everything." Sarah chuckled and leaned against the counter, watching him work. "I could get used to this." Victor grinned. "That's the plan." He handed her a plate of golden pancakes, and they sat down at the small kitchen table together. The morning light streaming in through the window. Emily joined them a few minutes later, her hair still messy from sleep but her face bright with a smile. "Pancakes," she exclaimed, sliding into her chair. As they ate, the room filled with laughter and conversation. It was simple, normal, and exactly what Sarah had been fighting for. For so long she had dreamed of a moment like this, a morning where she didn't have to think about escape routes or hidden threats, a morning where she could just be a mother, sharing breakfast with her family. Halfway through the meal, Emily looked up at Victor, her expression serious. "Are you really staying with us?" Victor put down his fork and nodded. "Yeah, kiddo, if that's okay with you." Emily's eyes lit up, and she jumped out of her chair, throwing her arms around him. "It's more than okay." Victor hugged her back, his eyes meeting Sarah's over Emily's shoulder. There was a warmth in his gaze that made Sarah's chest tighten. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were building something real. Later that morning, after the dishes had been washed and the babies were napping, Sarah and Victor stepped outside to take a walk through the forest. The ground was soft beneath their feet, and the sun filtered through the canopy of trees, casting dappled light on the path ahead. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of birds chirping and the gentle rustle of leaves. Finally, Victor broke the silence. "How does it feel?" Sarah looked at him, her brow furrowed. "How does what feel?" "To be free." The question made her pause. She thought back to the long nights spent crying, the fear that had clung to her like a second skin, the desperate fight to protect her children, and now here she was, standing in the middle of a peaceful forest, the weight of the past slowly lifting off her shoulders. "It feels strange," she admitted. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to knock on the door and tell me it's not really over." Victor nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's normal. After everything you've been through, it's going to take time to trust the quiet." Sarah smiled softly. "I never thought I'd see this day. I owe you so much, Victor." He stopped walking and turned to face her, gently taking her hands in his. "You don't owe me anything. Sarah, you did this. You fought for your family. I was just lucky enough to be there with you." Her eyes filled with tears, But this time, they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of gratitude, relief, and something else she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "I don't think I could have done it without you," she whispered. Victor brushed a tear from her cheek and smiled. "Well, you don't have to do it alone anymore." For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah let herself believe it. As the afternoon faded into evening, the cabin was filled with the warm glow of the setting sun. Emily played with the babies on the floor, their laughter echoing through the room like music. Sarah sat on the couch watching them with a content smile as Victor walked over and handed her a cup of tea. "Everything okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Everything's perfect," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, and the scent of pine filled the air. For so long, Sarah had dreamed of this moment, a life free of fear, a future where she could watch her children grow up without constantly looking over her shoulder. As she sat there, surrounded by the people she loved, she realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning. A new chapter in their lives, one filled with possibility and healing. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had fought, she had survived, and now she was ready to live. And as the sun set over the forest, casting its final rays of light across the cabin, Sarah knew that this was the life she had been fighting for. A life worth every battle, every tear, and every sacrifice. The future was theirs to build, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah was ready to embrace it. They had found their new dawn.